knock, knock, knock.
Well, then I will make sure
or you can give it
that I
to
know
Sid,
that. I mean,
then she can pass it
I'll
along.
tell Angela.
Because she'll be evaluating me.
Okay, good.
So.
Sorry, I'm gonna put this right here so I can see who's wanting to do
Just
public
barely
comment.
made this whole long text to my roofer, and then don't you hate it when you kind of go away from it, and then everything you just texted goes away?
Did it go away?
Yes, I hate that.
Oh, shoot. Are we ready? Okay, welcome to Law and Licensing. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to, if everybody could please introduce themselves, and we'll start here in the front. Welcome. If you two could introduce yourselves. Okay.
Mr. Terry Shoemaker from the Utah School Board Association and Utah School Superintendent's Association.
Tracy Watson, Utah Education Association.
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Charter Schools. Evan John, Board of
Okay.
Oh, Utah Highway Patrol.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with item 2.1 on the agenda. This is for discussion. It's the student advisory to the board, and Angie Stallings.
Yes, thank you. And I don't know if board member Linda Hansen has called in.
I'm here,
Oh, there
Angie.
she is.
Can you hear
Great.
me? Okay.
Okay, we can hear you. So this issue was brought forward to Board Member Hansen's attention from a constituent, and she may want to speak more to her experience with the young woman, student who came as part of one of our educational highlights one month with this idea. But I'll just start to introduce it, and then Board Member Hansen, whenever you'd like to take over, please feel free to interrupt me.
We see one thing.
Yes.
Congratulations,
Oh.
Linda. We have
Oh,
a baby.
thank you.
She had a grandbaby.
Okay.
Yes, new grandbaby, super cute, born this morning in Virginia, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Little Prairie. She's really cute. Super cute.
Yes, super cute. And so the short story is that the constituent went out to D.C. as part of a program. I think she's a senator of in a program, and heard that other state boards and other states have student advisory groups or liaisons that work with their state boards of education on policy to provide the student viewpoints and provide feedback from a student perspective. So today we're going to be discussing whether or not and how we might involve high school students, whether that's in the form of one or two liaisons that attend board meetings, or if it's establishing a student advisory council that could meet monthly or quarterly. I think that at this point it's really open for discussion. Board Member Hansen, did I describe that correctly?
You did, and I have to say, Kate DeGroot is the one that brought this to me, and she is a constituent of mine. She was here, if you remember, I guess it was probably back in January or February. She came with another student who had earned scholarships. She wanted to be here, but she's actually out of the country. Her parents sent me a picture of her. I think she's in Africa doing some student learning there. And so it looks like she's having a fabulous time. But she sent us an email. She feels very strongly about this and would love to have us have some opportunity for students to give input. She just feels like, and I think she said in the email that student input is different than teacher input or administrator input because they see things from a different point of view. And I think that's a really good point to make. So I think this is great. I think the more students we can get involved, the better. And so I'll leave that up to you to discuss. But I was grateful she brought this to us.
And
It's on.
Yeah. Go ahead, Board Member Warner.
Well, I completely agree with with this idea, and I wanted to share a couple of reasons why. Morgan and Box Elder County both have students on their local boards, and I'm sure there are others, but I just know in my area, Morgan and Box Elder do, and I am completely impressed with that. But second, on the School Safety Commission, we have really impressed with these kids are articulate, they do their research, they are active, and they are absolutely amazing kids. And I just listened to a presentation not too long ago about apathy and voting and people, the young people not getting involved. And this may be a great way for kids to become involved in the governmental process with, making decisions. But the kids that I've seen that have been involved with things like this are absolutely amazing. And what we want are informed kids, right? I mean, we really do. And so they do their homework, they have opinions, they're articulate with those opinions. And I think it would bring a very unique perspective. And Linda and I were talking about this the other day, and we have, with all due respect, we have representatives of charter schools, we have representatives of school boards, we have representatives of administrators, we have representatives of teachers, we have representatives of a lot of different voices, except for the very people we're trying to work with, which are the students. And it would probably bring a very unique and interesting perspective. So I think whether it be a student advisory board or a student or two that are appointed to be on a committee or something, I just think that it would probably be very positive. So I'd be supportive of this.
Okay, go ahead.
I think just to provide some structure and kind of ways we could move forward on this item is, I think the first step would be to kind of flesh out whether you want a student advisory council, a liaison, one or two, kind of the first decision point. And then we could maybe start to talk about, based on that decision, what maybe if they would come every meeting, or every other meeting, monthly, how you would like that to, or I'm sorry, quarterly. And then if we get enough information today, I think the vehicle, if it ends up being a student advisory council, would be to create a resolution that, similar to our other advisory resolutions, like all those acronyms that you heard yesterday, like access, yes, policy, correct. Thank you. Or a resolution that's incorporated in as a policy. We'll figure out the actual name, whether it's a policy or resolution. But it would be a document that describes how many times they meet, who leads it, what the duties would be, if there's like a chair, if it's the advisory council, whether we're reimbursing for travel and providing some sort of a monetary reimbursement for their time. Some of those things could be fleshed out, and if we could get enough details today, we could actually bring the policy next month, or you could direct me to work with Board Member Hanson to flesh out those details to bring something back. So I just wanted to provide that context of what next steps could look like moving forward.
Anyone have any ideas? Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I guess to get the conversation going, I would think that a full committee would be better than just one or two, because that would allow this to be experienced by more students than just a couple in the state.
Would we want the committees to be like each of the districts? That would then incorporate, and it would be 15, or maybe a region, like divided up by Senate regions.
What are you thinking, Daryl? You've got thoughts going on. No, that's how I think. So I know thinking's going.
No, I'm trying to.
Or maybe we could get like a cost analysis of what that would look like.
And another idea might be to just advertise the program and then have students apply that are interested, because you may get a bunch of students from Davis County or Utah County that are interested and not. But then as part of the selection process, the board could try and take into consideration representation across the state and making sure as much as possible every board district or region is represented, something like that.
I think it would be very difficult to me individually, like if we looked at it as a district, each district representative, we as board members had to like pick or nominate, that would be hard. I think there should be some type of a selection process that's not dependent on one person.
Or maybe
deciding
through
who
the
they
local
are.
boards.
There's a lot of local
That's
boards.
true, there are.
What if we just did it maybe by Senate race or something like that, where I mean, because you don't probably want to have 10, I do look at the cost of it. Probably we don't want to have 15 or, that may be too many.
Right.
Because look at how fun we have in trying to make decisions. And so I'm wondering if we did it, if we kept it pretty small to 4 or 5 and just had a couple rural and a couple along the Wasatch Front, kind of along a Senate race line.
You mean the state Senate?
Yeah, like the way the geographical boundaries of it.
Right.
Or maybe even one for each congressional district and then 2 that would represent Senate, so maybe 5.
5 would work. Yes.
So maybe the next part, if we've decided it's a student advisory council, 5 members, I think we can get a resolution based on that pretty easily. What about talking about how often they meet and then maybe an example of job duties? I think those are the 2 other big decision points.
Go ahead.
One of my concerns is time for students. I mean, I know what it's like to have a senior in high school that's involved in extracurricular activities and things, and I know this is a wonderful opportunity and could be considered, that extracurricular activity for a lot of students. And so I'm just worried about the timing. Would it be better to do it every other month or every month? And I guess that would depend on what the responsibilities were, how much preparation work would go into those meetings that they would be gathered for, because I just don't want it to be a pressure point, something else that they have to do, but it very well could be something that they love and enjoy doing as well. So
Yes.
I think that the way that they communicate, for example, the kids that I've worked with on the School Safety Commission, they do a lot. They don't sit down and meet. They're not like us. They Snapchat to each other or they text us or Instagram us. And so they may be able to do a lot more communicating through their online
social media.
platforms. And so maybe they don't have to meet so often, but because they're really good about communicating through online platforms.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. In the state of Utah, we have character and civic council, and I don't know how much has been done with that. I haven't heard any reports and any progress on that. I'd be interested. There is a state law. It used to be called 53G 10202. I don't know what the new code is right now. But it is about maintaining constitutional freedom in the public schools. Expression of personal beliefs by a student participating in school direct curricula or activities may not be prohibited or penalized unless the expression unreasonably interferes with order and discipline. I think, and it can go on. Free exercise of voluntary religious practice, freedom of speech. I mean, it goes through, and then 53G 10204 talks about the character and civic education, talks about honesty, integrity, morality, civility, duty, honors. And if a student advisory committee, if they, maybe this would be their first lift, I guess, duty to understand what this means and to really look at what it means to uphold the Constitution. What is the proper role of government? What are the duties of, so that they understand not just, okay, I'm going to get involved and I'm going to voice my opinion, but what is the proper avenue to do that? How the process actually should work? You know, are we going to assign a board member to be a part of this committee?
That's the question, yeah.
Yeah, who, you know, what other adults are going to help steer this? I mean, I'm all for this. I think it's fantastic. You know, I know that Harriman City has a youth program of their own city youth council where they're involved, but it's also a council person is also part of that and directs them. So I'd be interested in really teaching the correct roles and not just let's just throw out ideas and it's, you know, try not a mobocracy type of situation. You know, to really understand how things work.
Okay. Another idea I did have, kind of piggybacking on Brittany's concern with time away from school. I know in their senior year they're able to have an internship where they can leave a certain amount of hours. I think they're also able to do it in their senior year, so I don't know if I don't know what that would look like. Yeah.
My only concern with that is currently a lot of LEAs require, so if you want to do tennis or golf or basketball, you are usually required to use up part of your day schedule in order to participate in some of those extracurricular activities. You have to be in the athletics class or the swimming class in order to do that. And so if you were to create this as an internship that was part of their daily schedule, then I think it just really tightens down the flexibility that a student has to really meet their academic goals prior to graduation. So that would be my only concern with that, is that it's tight already for students to try and fit all the things that they want to do in their schedule. And so if we were to infringe on anything that had to do with their school time, I think we would make it very difficult for students to participate.
Okay. I know that there are students that choose internships as their route.
Correct.
Right?
But
okay.
There are some that do, but to make that as how to participate would make it very difficult for the number of students who would be able to participate.
Okay.
So.
If I may.
Board Member Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. I think being as remote as some students are, that maybe a Zoom conference or some type of video conferencing could take place so that students can be involved in a discussion. You know, that can be an easy setup. You know, if they wanted to be part of a political science class in high school. I don't know if some universities or high schools have that, or a concurrent enrollment class has that, or any type of FBLA class, leadership class. If they want to make this as an extracurricular activity, I'd be interested to see what the time frame it takes that students at the Harriman City Council, what time is placed upon them and what are the requirements there, and if we can replicate that in a broader sense to fit our needs, you know, it might be something to look at.
Well, I know.
I think can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Sorry.
Linda.
I think that maybe we're getting a little off the subject. I don't know, but I think we can make this look like however we want it to look. And I'm thinking that we can work with their schedules so they don't have to miss school. That's just my thought on it. It didn't seem to be a concern that when Kate brought it up, that it would be a problem for her. And she's a very involved student. So I think that we can work through their schedules, and I think students who don't feel like they have the time won't apply.
That's true, and they utilize social media really well. So I think
I think it's worth a try. I think after, it's not something we've done before, so it might take a year, and we might have to come back and do some revising or some of those kinds of things if we feel like it needs some changes. But I think it's worth a try to try it and see how it goes.
I agree. Board Member Brittany Cummins?
What if we look at a 5-member committee from dispersed geographical areas, and that they can meet every other month, and then they can do whatever they want to do. If there's any assignments or things they're working on, they can look at online or communications that they want to accomplish other ways during that interim time, but that they meet every other month. And I do think we need to look, and when we write that policy or resolution, really what are the responsibilities? Are there assignments that we as a board could give to this committee? Right. So, we talk about research and data, right? Here's the information that we want for this particular topic. Are there assignments that we can give them? For example, we have a task force looking at high school credit requirements right now, right? And could there be an assignment given to this committee that says, would you, look at these options? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths of these current requirements, et cetera? And so if they're given assignments on occasion, things that we want that their legitimate feedback on that we think would really inform specific policy, but also allow them some room to say, here are some things that we're concerned about and we're worried about, things that are on our minds and weighing heavy on us. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I think we have to be deliberate so that it doesn't become a waste of their time. Because I think that is my biggest fear, is that we don't make it so that they don't want to participate in government as they grow up, because they're like, it's useless. My time was wasted. My voice didn't matter, et cetera. But they really feel and understand that this is how we get involved. Committees and commissions and boards are an important part of our government. We often focus on the federal government, when we talk about government, but there's so much that goes on in local decisions that are made every day in committees and commissions. And how do we help them have a good experience so they're like, I can do that and I want to do that. And so.
Okay. Let's see. Seeing no other lights, do you feel like you have enough to at least get started?
I do.
Okay.
And then maybe when we bring back the policy resolution, in the meantime, we could get feedback on duties or you may think of some more things, and we can fill that in a little more. So,
okay.
Do you want a board? One question I did have. Sorry, I didn't mean to
you're fine.
on you, Board Member Cummins. But you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, who would lead it, and that Harriman has kind of a city council member who's kind of the chair or the liaison from the board. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to have a board member, and then we could have somebody from staff who are kind of the two, mm-hmm. Leaders of that.
I would propose that.
I was even thinking of the new policy advisor maybe being the staff with. Mm-hmm. Because I'm going to ask. I thought maybe we could bring back some ideas too, along with the resolution. We could look at what Harriman City has as their duties. Maybe look at some other states who have these advisory councils. What are some of the duties that they've asked, mm-hmm. and we could bring that back too. So, mm-hmm. Do you want a board member to kind of be?
I think that's kind of the. Yep. Is that the general consensus?
Yep.
Board member. Oh,
sorry.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
I forgot my question.
Oh,
go ahead, Brittany.
Go ahead, Brittany.
I was just curious if we want the board member to run those meetings or just to be a liaison, because and you're talking about staff being there as well, and I'd be curious if the superintendent has any recommendations on who could kind of facilitate that in such a way that it feels.
It needs to feel like the students are running the meeting,
yes,
but there should be like a facilitator.
Someone who can really, like Board Member Lisa Cummins was saying earlier, that it's not just an experience of but how do we learn good governance in the process of participating in governance.
Superintendent.
Thank you. Cindy Dixon, State Superintendent. So I've had a little bit of experience working with student advisory councils, and I think that you structure the experience in a way that they're learning government while they're doing it. So rather than placing them in a class or lecturing to them, my experience is that you get them involved in the process, and then you create the analogies. This is like how this works in this particular setting. My experience is we have some really savvy students who already get it, and they're probably the ones that will raise their hands and say, I want to be a participant in government. And these are often students who are already involved in youth senate and youth councils, and in Holiday City where I live, we have a youth council as well. And some of my neighbors have been involved in that council, and they're students that are really involved in a lot of ways generally. So I think in terms of staff, the staff member assigned can structure the meetings in a way that provides that kind of learning. So they're providing feedback to your strategic plan or specific initiatives that you direct them to, just like Access. I mean, I see it's akin to how Access has been such a helpful committee in really giving input in different ways, and they really have helped shape your policy decisions. So I would recommend that whether it's the chair or leadership, assign a board member to be the liaison, and then that board member work directly with staff to be determined that could help shape and structure what that looks like, and then bring recommendations back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So are we good? Yep. Any other ideas? Okay, then we will move on to 2.2, R277-303 Educator Preparation Program, and Travis.
Good morning. I'm Travis Rawlings. I'm the Educator Licensing Coordinator for the State Board. I hope we all enjoyed our month off of licensing rules meetings. Well, the committee, it was, we didn't do it in the committee last month. So the next rule that's before you today is R277-303, replacing, which would then replace with the new system, the current R277-503. A couple of things are important on this rule as we take a look at it that I just wanted to make some comments before we kind of go through what the rule is and what it's talking about. The first one being that, excuse me, the first thing being that much of this language that's in this rule is actually currently in what was passed in by the board in R277-301. It was pointed out by some stakeholders that the first section of 301 that talked about university preparation programs and their approval was kind of out of place. That 301 was focused on licenses, but there was this section about preparation programs at the beginning. And so a lot of this rule is taking that language and moving it to this rule. And then later, it is always the plan when we've gone through all these rules to revisit the original rule to make sure everything's cleaned up and aligned and those kind of things. So we would take it out at that point. But the other thing I wanted to make absolutely clear before we start talking about this is because there has been some confusion. We've already received several bits of feedback that we should add this, and we probably will recommend an amendment to this, if not this month, then in August. And that is that educator preparation program does not mean university. That's not what that term means as you read through this rule. The intention is that this educator preparation program means any program by which an individual is being prepared to be a licensed professional teacher, whether that's a university, whether that's an LEA, whether that's some kind of a state program, whatever that is. And so as we look at this rule, as we talk about it, you need to be aware that what we're talking about is not just universities, but LEAs and things like Teach for America, if they wanted to partner with an LEA, and things of that, anything that wants to prepare a teacher. So as we get into this, one of the things that we've been using as a bit of a metaphor for the licensing is the board has been really focused on two things. If you think of licensing and teaching as a race, the board has been focused on the start of the race, the associate license, what's the beginning, and the end of the race, which is the finish line, the getting to the professional license. This particular rule, the way it's written, is talking about everything in between. That it's talking about, does the board need to work with these programs in the process? If you read through the rationale that I wrote, there is an argument to be made that this rule is completely unnecessary. That argument exists in that if you only care about the start line and the finish line, then you don't care about the middle. The assumption was that based on how the board and the legislature have interacted and wanted to interact with university programs, that was not the path that we wanted to go. So that's why we wrote the rule the way we did. Now, if that's not what you want to do, that's up to you. Excuse me. And so, but as we went through this, we realized that just like the licensing requirements, just like the teaching requirements, the expectations for programs were inconsistent. That everything, universities had one standard, ARL had another standard, APT had a different standard, and it was all over the place. And so the intention of this rule is to create a level standard for every preparation program, that every preparation program must meet. Okay? Are there any questions before I just kind of step us through the rule body itself? Okay.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So you mentioned the argument not being necessary. Who is making that argument? Where's that coming from?
Well, I don't know that there's anyone making that particular argument. I just, when I critically think about these kind of rules, I try to weigh both. And I think there is a legitimate argument to be made, but no one's really pushing that I'm aware of. So the first thing that this does to point out in the first section of the rule, it talks about how the superintendent should go through program approval. And that is the first big change here. Again, as I sent out the draft for feedback, one of the things I mentioned was there is, again, an argument on both sides about whether you want to delegate this authority to the superintendent or if you want to hold on to this authority yourself as the board. This is written assuming it is delegated to the superintendent. It would not be difficult to switch that if that's what you want to do. But essentially, the first section talks about that there needs to be uniform procedures. It talks about aligning programs to our expectations, which are those other rules that are described, and then ongoing monitoring. So like the board has already adopted in 503, this idea that program approval is a cyclical thing. That it's you are reviewed, you're approved, and then you continue, and then there's a cycle of being reapproved, and so that's what this is talking about here. It also takes the reporting requirement in the current board rule. Universities are required to submit an annual report every year. This kind of stretches that to say, we'll do that as necessary because ultimately the other rule requires the superintendent to report to the board. And so the superintendent may or may not need information from all of the different programs.
Okay, Board Member Warner.
So, and I read that, but in the beginning, you talked about the different preparation programs, that this isn't focusing on just university or college programs. There are other ways. Why is it that only the universities have to submit some sort of report about their programs and not the other entities?
So under the current rule, the rule only applies to universities. Under this rule, it would apply to any programs, be they university or not, that the superintendent needs information from. So this would apply to both. It's only the current rule that only applies to university.
Okay.
But it says.
I'm seeing, okay.
Am I looking at the wrong place? So the where it says
What line?
line 44,
Okay.
the superintendent may require a program or subset of programs to submit reports.
Okay. I was looking also at the other one up at by 32.
32,
33.
yeah.
And so I'm thinking that this only applies to, that whole section applies to.
That's a very good point. There was actually some other confusion from stakeholders on those. The line 32 and 34 only applies to universities because only the universities have to deal with Board of Regents.
Okay.
Oh.
So that's what that was talking about there.
Michelle.
Oh, yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
This is an intriguing idea, and it's easy to visualize what it looks like for a university because we're already there. So if a LEA is wanting to participate in the alternative type licensing realm, what would this look like for an LEA? Because if you have to have a program approval, because not all of them do it on a regular basis. Maybe they are hiring and they make that decision to hire somebody who isn't coming from a university, and they're prepared or in the process of preparing to participate in that. What does it look like for them? Do they have to have pre-approval long time in advance, or what do they have to have a program developed, or can they look at that person they're hiring and develop that program around them?
So the intention is, and as always, Brittany, you're very much ahead of me in the rule, but that's okay. Because ultimately our anticipation is that the ones who would go through this type of a program approval process would be the significantly sized districts that are kind of doing this now: Granite, Jordan, Davis. And then later on in the board, it directs the superintendent to create a model program which can be adopted. And so the idea being, and again, I can talk about this more later if necessary, but one of the things we've heard from stakeholders is they don't want the board to just back off completely. That when I talked with the ARL candidates that I had a focus group with, well, ARL, APT, all the different alternative folks, and HRs, they really talked about the idea that they wanted that some of the problems are being too strict, but they also don't want nothing. Like they want something in the middle. And so the intention was that the board, so whatever ARL/APT is, it really becomes something where the board has created courses and solicited and reviewed things to say, okay, this aligns with the teaching standards, this will work, and then handing it to Tintic School District to hire somebody and saying, well, here's some things that you can use that's within the program, and you can take whichever classes you want or do this competency or whatever from the model program. That was the intent. Is that perfectly solidified as an idea? No, it's not. So.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So when you talk about that model program, so you're saying that you need to approve a program. Mm-hmm. So for an LEA that's trying to do this, and so Davis has developed some things in regard to their APT route mm-hmm. that's pretty phenomenal mm-hmm. and impressive, right? And so you would say you would approve that, but what if it wasn't quite so phenomenal, right? Or what if it was different than what Davis is doing or simplified in some way? What is the criteria that you're thinking of? What are you considering as you establish the approval process of what that is? And so when a small district or a charter school takes the model program, and you're talking about some flexibility and saying what would work and what wouldn't, at what point would it be unapproved?
Right.
And so I'm guessing, I guess the question is what is the criteria that you're establishing for this approved program?
And so I don't think that that's detailed in the rule clear right now, but the idea is, quite honestly, that it would be the same thing that we do with universities, and that is when we go to review a university, we're not checking boxes. We're saying, show us how what you're doing with your students is aligned to the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. And then they show us that. And if we don't feel it's sufficient, we would advise them of that. And they, often what I've found, when I go and review a university program, because I've done a few now in Utah for the last 3 or 4 years, when I tell them that I have a concern, I'm never telling them something they don't already know. And so with with a district, what I anticipate would be, first of all, that we want to hold the program accountable, not the person. Mm-hmm. That's one of the issues we've run into. And so Tintic or Davis still, we're not going to get in the person's way, but we're going to tell Davis, this isn't sufficient. You need to keep working on this. You need to submit an annual report. You need to tell us what you're doing. Because most often what happens, again, with universities, because that's what we've done this with, we say, we're seeing a weakness here, and let's talk about it and figure out how to solve that problem.
One last question.
Yes.
Thank you for answering my questions, Travis. You're fantastic. So when you say we're seeing a weakness, mm-hmm. is it in what's being done or what the results are?
So I think the intention in the new system is what the results are. I mean, because we really want to focus on those outcomes. I think in the current system, it's a little bit of a mix of both. I mean, the first thing that jumps into mind is a particular university that whose content, their assurance of content knowledge was lacking a little bit. And so we had conversations, and they agreed with the issue and corrected it, essentially. But we do want to try to focus more on, like we've said in 301, we don't want to focus on coursework. We don't want a list of classes that we're checking off. We want to talk about competencies. So if you're Davis School District, how are you making sure they know their math competencies? It might be a class, it might be something else, but if you can show me you have a well thought out and rigorous process, that's what I'm reviewing.
Okay.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, did you have something? Okay, go ahead.
So I might jump in onto the other side of the argument then. In my head, I'm thinking of proper role of government. Okay, we just had this discussion, so it's in my head. How much of a top down are we putting on programs and discounting others that would produce great educators if they don't fit the definitions that we set forth?
So I think that what you're describing is exactly where we're trying to find that balance. Ultimately, this is a statewide license. So if the state is not controlling the criteria for that license, then it has no purpose.
Okay, so I have brought that same argument up that the state is in control of the standards and the assessments, right? But supposedly we're not in control of the curriculum, right? And I would say that's a fallacy, that curriculum does have to support the standards and have to be able to pass the test for this, right? So basically the same thing here would have to be the middle portion have to support the teacher standards as well as passing the praxis and being accepted and getting those license, that we have to control the content as well eventually. And so that's my concern, is how much further expansion of control are we having at the top level that we're not giving kind of like a free market run through of checks and balances, as well as who's going to win and who's going to lose and why did they lose? Why are we solving the problem for them? I get that not a lot of people today want the responsibility of having to fail, right? That's somebody else's job, right? That's why they want more control at the top level. You know, they don't want that at the district level or the individual level. So, but if we take that away from them, then they won't learn. And then the top will become bigger and bigger and bigger until no decision is made at the local level, right? So that's my concern. We're seeing it all over the place in various different aspects of topics. So I mean, this would be just one more, and it makes me nervous.
I certainly understand, and it's certainly not my place to debate with you at all. I mean, I certainly understand your point. I think that you're absolutely right, and I think that there's a good example of what we're trying to accomplish in the rationale, where it talks about a few years ago where the board and the legislature were concerned about how teachers were being prepared to use technology. They felt like it wasn't happening, that what universities were not doing a good job of it. And so what the board did was they adopted language that was broad, that said, these are what we want you to do with teachers. It was more specific than the teaching standards because it talked about personalized learning software and it talked about working in an online setting. But they were broad enough that when the universities went and looked at that, they were then able, in the local level, how are we going to accomplish that? It's our goal to make sure that we're preparing those teachers for technology, and the board has pushed us in that direction, but not made us a cookie cutter, you know, because like that's the line, is total freedom versus everybody's exactly the same. And I think that's what we're trying to balance. Whether or not we accomplish that balance will definitely be on how we implement it. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a concern. So.
Okay, Board Member Warner.
Okay, so I was prepared today to come forward and say, how do we work? We have a teacher shortage, seriously, a serious teacher shortage. I got this in the mail that I will refrain from using my work language and just say this was very disturbing, and I don't agree with it at all. But I was prepared today to come sometime and say I would like to have us look at the teacher shortage and figure out a way to where we move within 10 years to have everybody university prepared, because I'm a really big believer of the university programs. I'm really worried because so I'm really worried because I'm thinking, are we changing our focus to adapt to the teacher shortage without confronting the issues? So let's make this, we'll include people like me to be so Brittany went through a teaching program at BYU, right? Okay, so she's a certified teacher. And she's probably a really good teacher. But instead of, I'm wondering if we're not addressing the teacher shortage issue in such a way. So what we're doing is saying, well, let's look at other people instead of looking at the issue of why do we have a teacher shortage. And when I look at this, I think I got home and I showed my husband this. And my husband is I don't know what it is. It's my husband has has physics and chemistry, and he was schooled at USU. He is a phenomenal teacher, and then he got his master's at Western Governors. And the idea that we give our teachers in secondary ed preparation programs a D+ is absolutely ludicrous, and that we failed in special ed. So I'm looking at this and thinking, could there be anything more disparaging to people wanting to go into the profession? So I'm wondering, I'm really struggling with this because I saw this the other day. I was really disturbed by it. And I'm wondering that instead of focusing on why people aren't going into the profession, are we going to be in the same place in 5 years where people simply don't want to go into the profession? Mm-hmm. And how do we market that profession instead of changing the dynamics? Anyhow, that's where I am. Just thought I'd share that with you, Travis.
May I respond?
Yes. Oh.
Sorry, you're in charge now.
Why don't you respond to her, and then are you okay waiting?
Yeah.
I think you make some very, very good points. And when we talk about the teacher pipeline, which is, getting people into the teachers, what we're talking about here is trying to make sure that I don't have any doubt that universities will always be the biggest part of that pipeline. But if we have other parts of the pipeline coming in, and we can still get them to the same standard and the same high quality teaching standard, then we've improved the pipeline, and it helps with that issue. I think there's other issues, other ways to tackle recruitment and loan forgiveness and things of that nature that can really help recruits. So.
Right. Yes. You and I are on the same page because I started making a list of things that we could do to attract people. We have a law enforcement, social worker, and teacher shortage. What can we do? And instead of, I just worry that, and I agree, I think the universities will always be the biggest supplier, but I really don't want to change much about it. Instead of focusing on what are some things that we can do, for example, loan forgiveness, for example, doing things that have a little bit more of an enticement for the profession. I just don't want to move to a time where we're just having every LEA do whatever they want. Okay. Anyhow, thought I'd share that.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
It's been interesting to see this conversation evolve since the licensing task force began a couple of years ago, right? And for me in that room, this was never about how do we solve the teacher shortage. It never was, because we had this plethora of ways to become a teacher at that time, right? You did not have to go through a university to become a teacher for the last, decade and a half in Utah. It's always been this way. And so this licensing in my mind, has never been a push toward alternate licensing or push toward something different other than universities. It's how do we improve the system as a whole so that we raise the standards for all ways of getting into the education profession. We live in a world where people do not stay in their careers from college to retirement anymore. Like, people move from career to career so quickly. The people who are graduating from college now do not live with an expectation of, I'm going to be this thing until I retire someday. And so it's, how do we create a profession that we understand the standards? What is it that we're looking for in a teacher? And I think this rule, why it was so intriguing to me, is because it raises that standard. We have always have had alternate routes to licensing, but there's never been an expectation that LEA that was recommending the license would actually have some requirements or some approval assigned to them. And I think it's a fantastic idea to look. So if you have an APT license, there's nothing other than just prove that you put a plan together, right? And this would say, if you're going to license an educator in Utah, if you're going to recommend a license, for a professional license in Utah, then you need to show that you have prepared that candidate to meet the standards that we have established in candidacy. And so I look at this as actually an elevation of standards, not a push towards alternate routes, but it elevates the profession. It provides flexibility for education preparation programs that are housed in universities as well. And so I think, and it doesn't create that, here's how to get a teacher this way and here's how to get a teacher this way, but it says, here's how to become a professional educator in Utah. And I read that report as well. And to me, it seemed like what they were trying to accomplish was, here's what we think an educator should look like, and here's how you're doing based on our criteria. And so they're giving grades based on a criteria that they've established. So, for example, Utah got a really high grade or one of the places we got a good grade on was because we required a 3.0 to be in a program, right? And that's something we're actually looking at. Is that really our best requirement, right? And we got a good grade on it, but we're actually pulling away from that concept because we feel like it's not really a beneficial barrier for what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's interesting as we come into this discussion of what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and does this rule elevate all of those who are trying to prepare teachers, or does it detract from it? And I've never seen anything that we're doing as a push towards alternative licensing, but I think it's elevating all and helping people to recognize that this is a valuable profession.
Okay. Go ahead and continue, Travis.
Okay, thank you. So as we get into the next section, section 4, starting on line 49, one of the things I wanted to point out in this rule was line 57 and 58. We know our current system is not perfect, and this is actually one of the things that we've tried to create. So this would apply to all. So right now in ARL, we have a rule where you have to be teaching full-time and you're eligible, or half-time and you're 50%. I mean, that comes up all the time. Universities have to do student teaching, and then APT just has to be a teacher. So technically, according to the current rule, I could be licensed through APT to teach math and be teaching English for 3 years and get a level 2 license to teach math. There's nothing in the rule that would prevent that. So that's what line 57 is talking about, that if you're doing this, it's important that you're showing you can teach this. That's the idea, that whether you have student teaching or an internship like in a university program, or I'm doing something alternative, but I'm working in the area. I'm showing I can do it. That's the idea. The next section, lines 59 through 78, actually does apply only to universities. This is not new language, just so you're aware. This is in the current 503 and the 301, and it's talking about online programs. The whole intention of this language, just so you're aware, is that so that we don't get into the business of approving online programs that are trying to operate within Utah. We only focus on our online programs, Western Governors, and then if someone completes an online program, they just get the license from the other state and transfer it through those rules. That's the current practice. So that's section 4. Section 5 talks about responsibilities for the superintendent. And so it does talk about lines. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Board Member Warner.
So are we requiring, because I can't find it in here.
Sure.
And I appreciate your explanation on that one section. What was it? Section 4. Mm-hmm. I was under the impression that kind of was applying to everything. when we're looking at these alternate preparation programs, are we requiring them to do the same things in that they have to, I'm not sure it's in here that they have to do the same standards and have the pedagogical performance assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that pedagogical performance stuff, you're right, maybe it should be pulled out, but as it's a requirement for the professional license, there would be no way around that requirement.
Okay, thanks.
In the next section, one of the new things that was kind of inspired by, quite frankly, the ULEAD bill that was passed about trying to have a research place for educators was the idea that the superintendent would use a website and some of those platforms to help educator preparation programs collaborate with each other regarding research, regarding preparing teachers. Because one of the things we've noted with the current system, when I talk to, for example, NEBO, and I talk to NEBO about are they going to do APT? How are they going to do it? Well, their answer is, well, we're just working with UVU to create something. And so, like, in the new system, UVU would be the one who'd be responsible for all this program, and NEBO's just partnering, using their stuff. So the idea that we try to connect these people and connecting people who want to be teachers to programs, that's the other part of this, trying to, again, increase that pipeline, trying to one more feed in. How that will work and whether it'll be successful or not, I don't know. It was an idea that we thought was worthy of inclusion. And the other thing I wanted to mention about this is lines 107 to 112, because this is, as I stated earlier, when Board Member Cummins asked the question, the superintendent is required to create a model program, but it also needs to meet the exact same requirements as anyone else. And it must be overseen by distinct staff, so that the staff that approve programs would be reviewing the program. That would be, there's staff creating and running this program, but there's another set of staff that are reviewing it, so that they are held to the exact same standard as anyone else. So that's all I have about this rule.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Two questions. Number one is just a possible typo, line 110. Should it be adopted by LEA?
Yes, I have that in my notes. Yes, you're absolutely correct.
All right. Then I have a real question. So I was able to participate in a couple of the NTEP gatherings and had listened to some of the conversations that were going on in regard to, as you look at education prep programs, and it's interesting now to kind of, in my mind, expand that to, an LEA actually being defined as a preparation program as well, in the sense. And one of the conversations was centered around the collaborative partnerships between a school or an LEA and an education prep program in a university, and really creating better standards for that collaboration. So it's not just, here's my candidate, looking for a program, and I'm going to send them off, and they're going to have a student teaching experience over here at school something, right? And there's really no connection, not always. There have been some programs that have really tightened that up, but there had been a conversation in some of those meetings about how to create the standards of what that partnership could look like, what it would feel like, and what the expectation is in that. And I'm just curious if what that conversation, has that gone away, or is that still part of NTEP's or UTEP's conversations? And, is that something that could be incorporated into this particular rule?
I think that's a good question. And the answer is UPTEP had been still working on that. We actually, myself and Dean Fossen from UofU had a few meetings with some more stakeholders to try to create some framework, and then we hit some bumps because life happens. But we definitely feel like there's that need for that connection. I think probably the 304 or the 504, which talks more specifically about secondary and elementary preparation, might be a better place for that. But it certainly could fit into this if that's how you wanted to proceed.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and go now to public comment. Sarah Jones.
Good morning, board members. Sarah Jones with the Utah Education Association. Thank you so much, first of all, for the depth of discussion you've had about this idea of what does educator preparation program mean, because I think that's really the substance of our comments today, although I do have kind of some other minor things that I'll share with you. But this idea of an LEA-based program or a university-based program is a pretty significant shift and has many repercussions, and I want you to think about the idea of timing. Because in a university-based program, you complete coursework and you do supervised student teaching before you become the teacher of record. In these idea of an alternately prepared program where you're working in an LEA, whether it's APT or ARL or this new thing, the timing would be somewhat different, right? You'd be completing coursework, modules is how you define it in 301, and becoming the teacher of record before you've completed the same work that a university graduate did. So they're not equivalent. Doesn't mean that an LEA-based program can't work. We haven't opposed that idea, but the timing is really critical. They're not exactly the same thing. So I want to draw your attention just to one thing in your previous rule of 301. So in 301, here's how I understood it before this new rule came out. So 301, we spent a lot of time talking about what professional learning modules should be completed before someone got the associate license. But then it also says, so in 301, you complete ethics, management and instruction, special ed, the Utah teaching standards, or you're enrolled in a board-approved educator prep program.
Okay, wait, where is that?
So in license 301, this was the framework.
Okay.
I'm on lines 225 to 231.
Under associate.
Under
requirement.
associate license. So that was the idea of someone who's alternately prepared should complete these modules before they go into the classroom. But it also says, or you could be enrolled in an approved educator prep program. So my thinking at the time was that was a university program. But this new rule, 303, kind of flips that and says, well, that could be an LEA-based program. So you wouldn't have to have completed those professional learning modules before you are in the LEA-based preparation program, I think being the teacher of record is how I would understand that. So again, it's this timing issue. That feels very close to APT right now. So I think it's really critical, and you guys have already identified this, that you need to define educator preparation program and alternative educator preparation program, because those two really aren't the same things. And to be clear, if alternately prepared candidates have to complete certain learning, even if they're in an LEA-based program, before they become the teacher of record and they're set to work. I hope I didn't confuse you by referencing back to 301, if that made sense to kind of what I was saying. So to me, I think this idea of some deep discussion on preparation becoming commonplace outside of a university setting is really important. And there are going to be a lot of implications to what that looks like. And even just yesterday, you talked about it, the computer science recommendation for task force recommendations, and it talked about pre-service teachers and working with education deans on getting information, to pre-service teachers. So we're very much in that framework of university programs. And this idea of LEA-based just turns everything on its head. And what is the order, and what do people really need to know before they become the teacher of record? So that's kind of the big picture. It sounded kind of like the rule might be coming back. I will just mention a couple of smaller things for you to consider. One is that this rule before you today, 303, talks about superintendent-approved programs, but the rule you passed, 301, said they were board-approved programs. So you're already contradicting each other there. Is it superintendent or board-approved? The definition in line 14 and 15 about LEA, this was kind of interesting to me. So an LEA, lines 14 and 15, an LEA includes an accredited private school for the purpose of this rule. So it sounds like a private K-12 school could have an approved teacher prep program with no other oversight by the board. I mean, you don't really interact with the private K-12 schools, But if you're defining LEA as an accredited private school, they could conceivably have this prep program. And is that the intent? Is that kind of how you want to manage preparation programs? The other thing that I'll just mention quickly is towards the end of the rule, the section Travis just talked about, line 107 to 108. So the superintendent shall design and maintain a model educator preparation program. I think this, if it's adopted by the LEA, it's really a model alternative preparation program, which is again why we encourage you to go back and add a definition of educator preparation program and add a definition of alternative preparation program. I think that will make the rule clear about what applies to each type of program, timing, and all of that. I think that's really the substance. Oh, and this is one minor thing, and Travis and I had a conversation about this, but on lines 52 and 53, it talks about the Utah Effective Educator Standards and everybody being trained to those standards. And granted, you don't have standards in every single license area, but you do have standards in educational leadership. So it would seem that any program approved to train someone in educational leadership should prepare them for the educational leadership standards, not solely the Utah Effective Educator Standards. So I do think there's kind of some cleanup that could be done. But at this point, our biggest concern is really getting clear intent from the board on what you want to do with preparation programs. And if it is moving to the LEA based, thinking about that timing, because not requiring things to be done before someone enters the classroom as a teacher of record is not the same as a university program where they have that supervised student teaching. So, thank you.
Sorry, my light's not on. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay. Board Member Warner.
Okay, so when we started our lovely journey on licensing almost 2 years ago, we did not include private schools. And then I know that there were, we never even discussed them. And I know there were some private schools that came a few months ago and spoke at board meeting about not being included. And so I'm wondering, I had totally forgotten I had that question on there. Do we want to go down that road? I'm not comfortable going down a private school road because I don't know what they teach. And so I agree with Dr. Jones. I'm wondering if we should take that out and just include the USDB, because we've never included the private schools in our journey on licensing.
Board Member Brittany Cummins.
That was my question, because when we talked about the other rule, whatever it was, the other rule, there was something in there about private schools, or did we take that out?
So there is a section, the section that was removed by the board was the section that would have allowed private schools to utilize LEA-specific licenses. That was removed. They are referred to in 301 as being able to recommend an individual to move from associate to professional license.
Okay, yes.
So it's interesting. I think we're having this interesting conversation of words and intent, because I keep hearing over and over again that we're moving towards, that somehow this is this big revolutionary movement towards away from university prepared educators to LEA prepared educators. And to me, I apologize if I'm missing something, but I don't see it. I see this as we've had all of these LEA prepared teachers in some form or another for decades, and it's been kind of a ignored chaos out here. And here we are trying to say, let's elevate what we've already been doing in kind of a chaotic way, and let's elevate it so that the standards are higher and more defined as we are allowing teachers to come into the licensing profession or the teaching profession alternatively. And so say if we are allowing private schools to participate in the associate to the professional area, having them in this rule puts the boundaries around what they're doing. It doesn't say, here, go for it. It puts the boundaries and says, here are the appropriate boundaries on how you can recommend a teacher for that professional license. And so I think if we're going to have it in this rule, then it has to be here in this rule in order to allow them to put the proper boundaries or the requirements that they would have to be approved in order to recommend someone for a professional license.
Okay. Yes, Travis. Oh, Board Member Lisa Cummins, go ahead.
I would just say I'd be against that because we're seeing, and we're seeing a draw towards homeschool, towards private school, because of this over tightening of policy and definitions at the top end, and not allowing for more liberty on how to teach and what to teach. And I see that in the communities. I see that with parents and families and teachers. You know, I know that Superintendent Dixon talked about what teachers have come to her, why they have left, you know, that they're looking for principal leadership. But I'm also being told sometimes that principal leadership has oppressed what they want to teach in the classroom and how they are to teach in the classroom. So I want to be very careful that we don't cross the line and say we're going to mandate and push policy into a private private sector that would force even more out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So private schools are not required to have licensed educators, but some of them want to have licensed educators. And so if they want to have a Utah license, they sign in. They basically say, I want to be a part of this licensing process. And so this wouldn't be a overreach into, it's a we want, it's the private schools reaching out and saying, we want to license our educators in Utah. And so it's not a matter of the government overreaching into. It's private schools don't have to participate.
Yes, Angie.
Yes, and Travis, you correct me if I'm wrong because you're this expert. But for private schools to be accredited, they have to have a certain number of licensed teachers. And in Utah, we do not have a private licensing entity. The State Board of Education is the educator licensing entity in the state of Utah. So unlike the state bar or even DOPL, I mean, if you think about it, there are government entities that are continuously licensing private individuals. I mean, that is a government function. The attorneys are different, but in general, doctors, contractors, et cetera, all have to be licensed. The question is, if we do not license private school educators, then we will, the state of Utah will have to create a private entity outside of the board to then have a separate licensing system. So I think that if you wanted to make the decision that no longer we're going to license or facilitate or manage the licensing of private schools educators, then you're essentially forcing the legislature to then assign that duty to somebody else. And then you could have kind of two separate systems, and just to think about that holistically as an overview.
Okay. Yes, Travis.
So I think it might help the discussion if I describe why we wrote that in the rule as we did. And again, it was, as Brittany said, it was to allow for people who wanted to engage in the process to do so. So like in the current system right now, our accredited private schools can utilize ARL because the ARL rule is written that way. So we have someone working at, say, Juan Diego High School, and Juan Diego wants that math teacher to earn a math license, and so they work through ARL and they do that. There are other schools that couldn't care less, and they don't engage with us. But you remember there was a bit of a reaction last summer when we had started saying we weren't going to work with private schools, and there was some legislative blowback and that whole situation. I can give you details if you don't remember. But the way we wrote this was right now they use ARL. And the intention was, okay, so moving forward, we would want them to be able to use this model system that the superintendent comes up with if they choose to do so. That was, I was literally mirroring what we do now with ARL. That was the only intent.
Okay. Okay, so to kind of move this along, we need to either amend the rule, adopt the rule, or ask that the rule be brought back with revisions based off of the public comment. So I guess I'm seeking input from you guys, or I'll just make a decision. But I don't really. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummings.
Just to publicly clarify, Sarah Jones mentioned a couple of inconsistencies between this and the other rule, and so I'm guessing those are things that will be amended as we move forward. So when we define educator prep program, that we recognize that means a university program, not people that are, right? And so I'm guessing those things will be taken care of as we move forward.
Yes, because she actually pointed out something very well. When I wrote that in 301 and the board adopted, we were just thinking universities. But now that we're thinking of it differently, that's why once we get through all these rules, we will circle back to 301 and help make sure everything aligns. That will definitely have to happen no matter what. So.
Okay, and then there's one other clarification that Angie needs to do.
Yes. So Board Member Bolter, as Sarah was providing her feedback, asked me about the issue of the superintendent versus a board-approved program. Because this is a rule that it would, my argument, or I would say that it still is a board-approved program. It's that the board is delegating the administrative responsibilities to kind of, review, monitor, prepare the application, the process, and make an initial determination or the final determination of whether that program is approved or not would be the superintendent who does that on behalf of the board, and then that ultimately is a board-approved prep program. I guess the question is, do we, and I'm trying to remember, is there an appeals process in here? Yeah.
So one of the things that it talks about is that, well, and you and I, Superintendent Stallings and I have discussed before that any action taken by the superintendent is can be reviewed by the board. But you'll notice in lines 42, 37 to 42, and this kind of mirrors the current model, that the superintendent can place a approved program on probation, but only the board itself can revoke approval. So ultimately, if we have an underperforming program that we've just worked with and we finally get to the end of our ropes, we have to come to you as the board to request that they be unapproved, essentially.
Okay. Thank you, Travis. Board Member Warner.
Mr. Shoemaker, I'd like to know what you think of this, if you've talked to the superintendents, and how, because is it going to be a lot of work? Is it not going to be a lot of work? I'd like to just hear your thoughts.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Terry.
Good morning, Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Boards Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. Yeah, we spent some time reviewing this. The committee that comes and helps and looks at these changes, these potential changes, and we did visit with Travis and others just on Wednesday of this week. Couple thoughts. One, I do think we feel strongly that licensing is a state board function. So you should be controlling that. That is a way to ensure compliance around a reasonable set of standards, so that what happens in one classroom is potentially similar to what happens in another classroom in terms of what the potential expectations for how a teacher could be prepared. That I think we agree with completely, that it's a license responsibility. The licensing is a responsibility of the State Board of Education. Secondly, our preferred preference for the hiring of educators has been the university programs, continues to be. And I don't know when that will ever change. However, as has been the case recently, and I thought Brittany clearly pointed it out, we've had a plethora of alternative programs over the last many years. And it's just piled in Travis's desk, this pile of things that we've got to get completed. What I've enjoyed about the licensing changes over the last couple of years is the attempt by the board to simplify all of that. So I worry about the possibility of creating now another alternative program, another, I still think you need to keep all of these things moving in the areas that you've got, the associate and the professional. Keeping it that way seems to make a lot of sense to me, because that was an attempt to simplify. I think we like the general direction of this, and I think we expressed that in that meeting on Wednesday with Travis and Angie. We would like to make sure that flexibility still exists under the conditions that we're in today. So we kept asking the question, what about the educator-specific license, or the, not educator, LEA-specific license? And this doesn't apply to that. We were repeatedly told that this license does not apply to that. And that particular license is for special exceptions. I want to again reemphasize, our preference has been and will continue to be the traditional program. However, we're continue to be in a shortage time frame. We continue to have the universities. I was at a meeting recently with folks from Brigham Young University, and their educator preparation program is down dramatically. And they're not the only one. And that continues to concern us. So whatever we're doing, we want to make sure that the outcomes that are done here encourage people to be part of wanting to participate and want to become teachers. We think simplifying, which is what you're attempting to do here, and yet maintaining a high standard, which is what you're attempting to do here, is the way to do that. We do like also the flexibility that the district-specific license allows under circumstances for which they feel like they have no other choice. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Brittany.
Sorry. Before you leave, I just wanted to ask a question. So you were saying that you mentioned earlier our attempt to simplify, and you're worried about creating another program, an alternate route.
I think I heard the suggestion that maybe, as we within the associate, moving in the associate program, as we're having folks who don't quite fit the realm of all of those categories from associate to professional, that the LEA portions of that may need to have their own separate program. That's what I thought you were suggesting, Sarah. Maybe I misunderstood that. So that's what I was speaking against.
Okay.
Well, I didn't know if that meant you meant separating them, and I was speaking against separating that. For the standpoint, I like the fact that keeping it simplified within its own, within the same categories helps. Okay. I don't think we want to go back to where we've been. Okay? Because where we've been is in a mess. And frankly, we've had all these different types of alternative preparation programs that as time has gone on, have created, I think, a licensing nightmare for the state board. So I'm trying to suggest that staying in a similar path that this is suggesting helps that. So I hope that answers that question, Brittany.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
We've heard from the public boards. I'm wondering about charters, and I don't know, Royce, if you have any, because when I think of LEAs, we also think of charters, and charters are so diverse in their programs and philosophies of teaching that I'm wondering how this affects them.
Okay, Royce.
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. I think honestly that our experience with the licensing is very similar to what Terry described. Each year, as an association, we put together a job fair for charter schools. Travis is there. We have 40, 50 schools that come year in and year out. And some of them are very conscious. I think most of them are coming and looking and say, we would like to hire somebody that's been trained at a university. There are other schools, I'm well aware, that are very determined to take this potential teacher, and they're going to mold them in very specific ways that may or may not have come through a different program. There are still others that say, we're going to avoid anybody that's interested in an ARL program. And so getting, as Terry suggested, taking sort of this motley crew of different license factions that we've had before, and as Brittany indicated, bringing some measure of order. We're not dictating that everyone does it the same way, but saying we do expect that there are some minimum standards, so that whether you get your license through the American Preparatory Academy or through Utah State, we have some minimum expectation that there is some commonality, that we can have trust that the students will have a minimally acceptable standard. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess I'm looking to see, do we want to have the rule go back and instruct staff to make revisions based on the feedback that we've gotten? Is that, or we make amendments now, or we adopt it? Yes.
I move that we approve R277303 on first reading and recommend it to the board for approval on second reading, and not include the final on that, so that it would have another month of movement. But that would be my motion, but I would like to ask for an amendment to that, if that's okay.
Okay, so
I don't know what the appropriate way to do that is.
I think I have to state the motion first, the original motion. So the motion before us is to send the rule R277-303 on, approve the rule of first reading and send it to the board on second reading.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes.
So the question I have is, would it be appropriate in the definitions section to add a definition of a teacher preparation program as an amendment?
Travis?
So I think it would be a good idea, if we don't want to spend time wordsmithing right now, to include in your motion direction to staff to prepare amendments for including a definition or any other changes you want us to make, asking us to prepare those amendments so that they will be ready for you at the next meeting.
So we could just include that with the motion.
Can I ask you to add alternate education programs? So like we separate those?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So I'm curious about the best way to define. So if we were, like I said, do we need to wordsmith it or not today? Right. But I guess defining the concept of what we're looking for, because if we define an education preparation program accurately, will we need to call it university versus alternate, or can there just be places in where we actually say this only applies to a preparation program held by a university, or this only applies to a preparation program that's housed in a university, et cetera. And so that way we're not muddling the definition, but we're being specific where it needs to be specific?
Yes.
My recommendation would be that you could ask staff to prepare amendments both ways, and then we could present multiple options to you in the next meeting.
Okay. So the amendment is to ask staff to prepare multiple options defining the educator preparation programs. I hope you wrote that down. Yep. Okay. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so now we need to vote on the original motion.
And sorry, I didn't read in the rule, but so the bottom talks about the effective date being January 1, 2020. And so that gives us time so that we recognize that the effective date is later, and we can go back to the other rules to make sure that we've fixed any inconsistencies as far as wording goes between the two. So.
Okay, yes.
This is actually a question I have, and I don't know the answer, and it's based on, again, some feedback that Sarah gave. Do these educator prep programs apply to administrative prep programs, or is that a separate rule?
So if you look at the very beginning of the rule, excuse me. Now I'm not finding it, so now I'm nervous.
So I wonder.
It was intended to say that if you're an educator preparation program that prepares individuals for a professional license area,
Okay.
which would be admin versus, and that's why on lines 25 through 27, those are the specific rules in those areas.
Okay. So what I think to address the question of if you're preparing administrators, I think the definition of the prep program will help because we can include in there a program that is preparing people to obtain their professional educator license described in 301. And then, because my understanding was that there was a separate rule and separate requirements for university programs or prep programs for administrators. So that would be dealt with somewhere else.
Okay. Okay, so then the motion before us is to pass R277-303 on first reading and send it to the board on second reading with staff preparing amendments in a draft, in draft options for ed prep programs. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Yeah, we better.
Can I beg your indulgence for just a moment?
Yes.
I just wanted to give you a general update very, very quickly about how things have been going. I'm starting to become a little concerned that we have created a very ambitious timeline, but also I'm concerned of fatigue in the field. I'll be perfectly honest with you. We didn't, when we distributed this rule for public comment in written form, we did not receive very much comment back at all. Obviously, the UEA did submit comment. I think I got word from maybe one university in one district, but that was pretty much it. Exactly. And so one of the things I wanted you to be aware of is we're probably going to mix up that plan that we had a little bit to try to maybe throw in some of the less controversial, the more simplified changes every other month so that it's not quite so meaty every time. So that's where we're going. I just didn't want you to be surprised when we come in August and maybe things have changed just a little. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Travis. Okay. Now, item 2.3. This is an information item on bullying and hazing amendments, model policy update, and that will be presented by Angie and Corby.
As Corby's sitting down, I just wanted to remind the committee that I believe it was in about January or February of 2016, Lillian Sosi Jensen and others came to present 5 or 6 different actions that the board needed to take, including board rule updates, that then resulted in the creation of the bullying prevention work group and the START, which took a year and a half almost to update Rule 613. That was kind of the first step, the bullying prevention rule. And one of the steps, on that list was also to create a model policy. The model policy is not required to be adopted by LEAs. They can create their own policy, and they're not required to use the model. And there's no requirement that the board approve the model policy because it does not have the effect of law. But Corby's here today to kind of give you an update on the work of the bullying prevention work group, where we're at today, where we anticipate going, and then also there's a draft of the model policy that's on board docs just for your information. And as you may remember, we have board members, Board Member Warner, Board Member Lear. Do we have a third board member on that work group that do participate on the work group? So Corby, I just want to give that background because the work that started back in early 2016, or was it early 2017? I apologize, it was probably early 2017, actually predated Corby's time with the office. So he may not be as familiar with that, but.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Corby.
Good morning. My name is Corby Eason. I'm out of the Student Advocacy Service section here at USBE. And so this morning I'd like to give you an update on the working group. Just a little more background. The working group consists of board members, LEA, a representative from rural and urban schools, and also other members, a member from Access as well. So we have met for the last year since I been on this task, and we have updated the rule. The rule should go to effect on July 9th based off any other amendments or public comment. But also here we, based off the last meeting when the rule got approved, we started with the work group. I mean, the model policy, and the model policy that we have here today really aligns with the rule, addressing the section of the rule, and here we go. And so I just like to here's the product that we have thus far. We still have to do clean this up so it can be reader friendly, but we have this product.
And I think part of the plan is, just to let you know, again, there's no required motion today, but after today's meeting, I believe Corby plans to actually distribute for feedback from the field this model policy to see if anybody else has any recommendations. And then I think the hope is, Corby, you correct me if I'm wrong, to provide the model policy to LEAs in July, probably, yes, and to post it on our website. Currently, we've got the old version of the model policy, which I believe is from 2013 or 2014, that is on our website. So we would like to get this updated and on our website for those who do want to take portions of it or use it as kind of for help.
And also, can I?
Yes.
Yes. So, and another date is very important based off 53G9-601. It requires school boards to update their school board policy regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation by September 1 of 2018.
Okay, great. Any comments from the board? From the committee, I guess. Okay, thank you, Corby.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on now to item 2.4, R2774-417, prohibiting LEAs and third-party providers from offering incentives or disbursement for enrollment or participation. That is a mouthful. Okay, Angie?
Yes. So the board's audit committee has received reports from our internal audit department on a number of audits that have gone on in the last maybe year and a half, and actually probably beginning, I think in 2014 was the first large audit that's kind of related to the subject. And the audit committee requested that the Law and Licensing Committee have a discussion of the audits, including explicitly getting some feedback from Executive Director Jennifer Lambert from the State Charter School Board on her work as she's been working with some of her schools who've been audited, things that she and others may recommend for changes or things for the board to be aware of that are coming up as LEAs are working through interpretation of R277417. And I would also throw out, it includes also 419, which is our big finance rule that talks about how you count students for funding purposes. There's also another related rule, which is 418, which deals with some requirements that non-traditional programs, including online, competency-based, distance learning, all those requirements, and maybe some discussion today about what amendments we could make or to direct staff to make some amendments to bring back to you for your consideration. So that's kind of the background.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify, we put it as an action item, but because with the discussion, if we found that we needed to revise anything, then we could, but it's not necessarily, we don't have to.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that. So I did have a question, though, on the audit. As I was reading through, oh goodness, the audit for Lumen, and now I thought I had it up. Here it is. Okay. I noticed that the audit was based off of the old version of R277-417, the one that was clear back from November of 2015. And in the middle, so maybe Debbie could help with this, the rule was changed, and I'm noticing some of the things that was pointed out have been changed in the new and current rule. So I'm just wondering, I guess I'm just a little nervous on, because there were changes made to the rule and we've adopted a new rule, how that would now change the outcome of the audit and on some of these things that were brought out. For example, it says when the old rule, section 2, where it says, except as provided, an LEA may not use public funds to provide a reimbursement to a student or the student's parent or guardian for curriculum selected by the parent. And the new rule has now been changed to state curriculum exclusively selected by the parent. So I'm just, anyway, maybe you can help.
Sure, I'll try and provide some context. So Debbie Davis, I'm the Director of Internal Audit, and we did do the audit. Lumen was one of 9 of the LEAs that we looked at, and kind of looking at Rule 417 was one of the things that we captured as part of the audit that we were looking at. And you're correct. For Lumen, yes, this rule, it changed kind of in the middle of the audit, and right. It was actually because of the things we were finding in the audit. We brought that to the attention of the audit committee, and they said, oh, we need to make some changes. So why wait? If we know something needs to change, that's one of the great things about the audit is we don't need to wait. Let's take corrective action. Let's move forward. So yes, it changes things a little bit, and obviously looking forward, we'll go with what the rule is now.
Okay.
That said, where the question came, and I apologize that I wasn't right when we started this item, is the question that came up that we talked about in audit committee, and Director Lambert can speak to it a little bit as well, is the rule as it is currently written, is it adequate to meet the needs of the board? Is it adequate for the objectives of the board in making sure that our students are safe and making sure that their privacy is respected and making sure that funds are used appropriately? All those things need to be considered as we're looking at the sufficiency of this rule. And so now it's kind of back to you, is the rule doing what you want it to do? And if we came and audited again, we would look at what's currently in the rule instead of what was in the past. The past is done, the audit's done, so we are moving forward.
Okay, well, thank you. So I like that you guys were proactive and created a rule based off of some of those findings. That I guess this rule went into effect in May, right, of this year, I think is what. Maybe it was earlier, but
I have about 5 versions of what. Let's see.
My recollection is it's probably be more like March, but
I think March. So I think July 8th, 2015. Initially, there was an audit done back in 2013 by the previous internal audit group that prompted a lot of what is in 417, or there were even elements. There were 3 rules that were all 419 that were split out into 417, 18, and 19. And so between 2015 and 2017, that's where we had 3 or 4 different iterations of the rule, just kind of moving forward. Oh, this didn't quite do what we needed. Oh, let's switch this. Oh, let's address that. But I think you're correct.
It went into effect May of 2018. May 1st, 2018 is when this new version of the rule went into effect.
I thought it was more recent than that, but yes, it is March 14, 2017. I'm looking online.
Yeah, and then it went into effect this year. So, okay. You might want to stay here.
Okay.
I don't know. Okay, so yes, board member Lisa Cummins.
So you said that you looked at 9, and I've noticed Provo's one of them, and Provo's been, I've seen Provo a lot.
I think this is the fifth time.
With audits, yeah. How many third-party vendor with working with LEAs are there in the state, and have those others been looked at?
So that is an excellent question, and I actually don't have the answer, but it would be fascinating to go back and look. I know in 2013 when they did that audit, they did look across the whole state, and they went out and did try and capture a number and say how many do we have, and I'd have to pull up that audit and look. But there were probably upwards more than 25 that were using it, and I'm assuming it'd be much larger than that even now, as online and as these providers, they're providing a great service that our LEs like. So I would assume it's larger than that. This audit, obviously we took a sample, we just looked at 9, 2013, we looked at several more, like I said, probably over 20 that we'd looked at. But it's kind of this ever-changing process, and the methods and the curriculum that's being provided, it's just kind of this constant change that's going on. So if it's an area of concern, if we don't think the rule is doing what it should, if there's other areas that we want to look at, we could prioritize another audit. We could just assign to staff and say, let's figure this out. Let's look at what's going on, gather some information, and see what we need to do to move forward.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So I was trying to remember exactly how this came to be, because I don't think it was about the audits that were performed, because I believe there's been a lot of corrective action that's taken place by these schools, and some of the questions came out of that corrective action, correct? That we've done all this, what the expectation is, and so now what about? Is this across the board compliance expected of all schools, not just us that was audited?
Right.
And so I guess my question is what have been some of the recognized deficiencies in this rule that make it difficult to ensure compliance of all of those who participate in this type of a model?
To address that?
Yes.
So you're absolutely correct that the question came back up not because of an audit in process that's closed, but because we are working on corrective action. That's the benefit of the audit, really is shown in the corrective action that takes place. So in addressing that, and I will say it's the State Charter Board, their performance oversight section, doing a fantastic job of following up on audit findings. And so they were the ones working with Lumen on, okay, what needs to happen in response to the audit, what was found, the cause of the findings. And so working through that process, Lumen, that LEA, they decided, okay, we'll come into compliance. This is what we're going to do. We think we understand the rule, the interpretations of the rules. But as we look out and see other LEAs and we look at these third-party service providers, it doesn't look like they're complying. And it looks like it gives them potentially this unfair or competitive advantage. So if we're going to comply, we want to ensure that everybody else is complying also. So that was kind of the discussion that we had. And so then going back to the rule, well, is the rule adequate? It hasn't been designed appropriately. It covers everything that it needs to. And do we just have an implementation problem where LEAs just don't understand the rule or they don't know about the rule? Is that the concern? So is it the design of the rule that's a problem, or is it the implementation that's a problem, or is it's designed, was it implemented, is it operating effectively? Do we know that? And so do we understand what's happening with compliance to really make sure systemically we really have a good internal control environment where we are protecting our students and our LEAs in the system of public education? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so I guess, well, let me, Board Member Warner and then Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Well, I think we're audited out. We have had a number of audits. We have a rule. If somebody's not following it, we just need to discuss it. I'm not sure we need to change the rule to make sure that people are complying. I think if people aren't following the rule, we just deal with it. We don't have another audit to see if they are following the rule. We have a rule. Let's just see if they follow it. And I think we've had a number of audits that I just don't think we need to prioritize another one. We just need to implement some sort of change or some sort of something if they're not following it. So.
Okay. No. Okay. We had some public comment.
Can I ask one?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And I was just curious because I know were there any ambiguities in this rule that needed to be corrected so that LEAs weren't wondering, am I compliant? Or they can argue back and say, well, according to my interpretation, I am being compliant. And so I think it's, what were the ambiguities and how can we work through it in rule, not through necessarily another audit? But and so that's what I would like to see. What are the ambiguities?
Okay, I've got Roy Spantassel on here and then Jennifer Lambert. Did you
So
want to?
just actually, her feedback was actually supposed to be the focus of our discussion, because she is actually going to raise, I mean, exactly what you said is kind of a segue to what Jennifer plans to discuss.
Oh, okay.
Which is, as she's been working with schools on those audits, some of the ambiguities or the differences of interpretation about the rule, and maybe some recommendations on things we could do to either tighten the rule or make it clearer. So I apologize, but I would recommend that Jennifer speak first and then receive public comment.
Okay, Jennifer.
Jennifer Lambert, Executive Director for the State Charter School Board. I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. Member Cummins made kind of the point is we've been working with schools since that very, very first audit. And when we find that schools that we authorize are out of compliance, we work with them and to help them get into compliance. And as we've done that, we've found a number of things. A lot of the schools have expressed frustration that maybe they're being made to come into compliance when others don't, and that they can get away with it. The other thing that we find is that the schools are not trying to do anything bad. It really is legitimately maybe different interpretations of rule and how to look at things. And so I don't think that it's necessarily need to punish, but I wonder if some clarification is in order, because if we as the State Charter School Board get from you that this is how you are interpreting board rule, and then we go and work with our schools to get into that compliance, but then other schools are allowed to keep existing with a different interpretation, there is a lot of inequality in that, which makes us as their authorizer very uncomfortable. Where I wonder if there's, where we often have the discussion, it's in actually Rule 419, and it is the definition of homeschool and distance learning program. So I believe it's under Section 2, it's in the definitions. But if you have, it's Paren 8 and Paren 13 and Paren 14, just some of those things, that's where there seems to be just legitimately different interpretations of what this means. And if you're going to have a standard way of interpreting, then that it either needs to be clarified and enforced equally, or you need to allow for the different interpretations. And I think 419, the big, huge one. Yes, so it's talking about, and the key things that we often talk to schools about is what does under direction mean? So in 13 B3, it says online student receives instruction under the direction of a highly qualified, etc., teacher. And then if you look at 14, it says a homeschool course means instruction. And if you look at B, it says not supervised or directed by an LEA. So there is a lot of room for different interpretations of under direction of an LEA or under a direction of a teacher of what that looks like or means. And we sometimes, in the audit, I think it's taken as a certain way or how it's typically interpreted, but it's not necessarily uniformly enforced.
Okay, Board Member Cummins. Lisa Cummins.
Having been a homeschool mom and having participated in a setup like this, I can tell you the flexibility and the less oversight, the more popular that program is, because there is freedom and liberty in how a parent chooses to teach that child, because they recognize that every child is different and that sometimes we could have multiple forms of curriculum in the house for each child, right? And so that allows for a mass amount of flexibility, and that is what the homeschool community is looking for. So I caution that the more restriction or the more defined night that we get on this, the more we could put in jeopardy what the homeschoolers have fought for in this state.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that I think the reason the definition of homeschool is in here is not to actually regulate homeschool families or homeschool instruction, but it's to distinguish when let's say a homeschool family decides that they'd actually like to re-enroll in a public school system, but in an online program, helping to distinguish when that family has actually moved away from homeschooling into the public school system, and what's the appropriate oversight, monitoring, and relationship. What do we want to say is the minimum oversight and direction of a school over the instruction of those students? Because I think and I'll just speak from what I've heard from some even parents or people who have participated in these programs, is sometimes they don't even know that they're actually part of the public school system. They don't realize that as they're receiving these public funds, they have now left what is homeschooling, and they are now part of the public school system. And the idea is, how do we provide those guardrails and those minimum standards as LEAs are seeking to help and support families who would like to come back into the public ed system, and still provide flexibility to families. There's always that balancing of providing flexibility, personalized learning, but at the same time maintaining the accountability, the safety, the background checks, the fiscal responsibility, making sure that students who participate in those programs aren't inadvertently obtaining, something that other students who are in the public school system are getting, like a free laptop versus getting a laptop that's provided for a year but then returned at the end of the school year back to the school. That's just an example of where we also were seeing with I think Provo School District's program, where they were treating their online students enrolled in one program differently than their online students in the other. And that creates equal protection issues of, are you now providing something to certain students above and beyond what you would provide to the other public school students? So it's very layered and complex. But I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that there's no intention of regulating the homeschool families or the homeschool instruction. It's only once those families enroll in the public school system, and then what happens, how do we have that balance and then make it fair, is I think what Executive Director Lambert is seeking. I'll be blunt, that what happens is as certain charter schools or school districts come into compliance with these audits, that oftentimes the programs will then move to other charters or districts. And so that is one of the complaints, is how do we make sure that you don't just now have to be auditing 160 LEAs, but instead make it, is it the training? Is it more clarification in rule? We want to get to a place where we've got enough there that you don't have to just continuously audit everybody on this. But
Sorry, it seems to me like, back to Board Member Warner's comment, where it seems like the bulk of the issue is really making sure that they're compliant with the current rule that we have. That seems to be what I'm hearing, is everybody just needs to be compliant with this rule. Yes.
Well, and that's just to echo that. Sometimes people have misconstrued this as just being a charter school problem, and the problem is then we go and we try to fix it in the charter schools, but it just moves elsewhere. And I think that it really, I know Angie and I have talked that this may be more of a compliance issue than anything. But I do know that the schools that we've worked with, they really are, they're trying to do what's right. They're trying to offer good education to the students that come to them. However, there is maybe difference of opinions between how they interpret these definitions in 419 and how this office interprets those definitions.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I would suggest that we ask staff to bring back any rules that would be associated with this and any recommended updates that might add clarity to practice. So if we're talking about defining rule and interpreting rule, so if we're interpreting rule this way, then we need to make sure that rule says this, not this. And so if we could come back with any recommendations of matching the rule to what
the intent
is. So.
Yeah. Okay, and did you have anything more?
No, unless you have more questions, but that's it.
I think we're good. So Royce, sorry, did you still want to give public comment? You're good? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So we'll just leave it with the direction of the staff to bring forward this rule, and probably, well, I guess 419 is on there too.
Yeah, and yes, and I think potentially 418 could be another part of that. So we'd work on all three of those.
Okay. So my question is, do we need to discuss 419, R277 419 still?
Oh, it's a different issue. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Just making sure. All right. So then we'll move on to item 2.5, R277-419, pupil accounting. And then Angie and Leah.
Yes. Thank you. I'll introduce it as Leah's coming up. And this change is extremely simple and is before you because of the passage of HB 317 this last session, which now allows students who are receiving educational services to support them with their disabilities, or they qualify for IDEA services, to allow those students who turn 22 during the school year to receive instruction till the end of the school year. And as that legislation passed, there's been a request that the deadline for the student to turn 21 match the fiscal year, so that it's cleaner, as opposed to September 1, which is really the kindergarten date. And that's why oftentimes in our data systems, we default to September 1. But as we, and I don't want to steal Assistant Superintendent Voorhees' thunder, but as she's been working with special ed directors, and then also she and I solicited feedback from Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, as well as our data section, on what an ideal cutoff date would be. And unanimously, it was July 1, because it would avoid students enrolling in, or not being sure about whether they qualify, because schools often start instruction in August, but yet they might turn 22 on August 30th. Or there's just kind of these weird anomalies where it would just be cleaner to have the date be the beginning of what is the school year for July 1, the July 1 to June 30 school year, and have it match the fiscal year, because there are fiscal implications now. And so that is the only change, is on line 123, to change September 1 to July 1. Okay. And one other thing I just wanted to mention, because this is important to get done before the new school year starts, staff would recommend that this be read on second and final reading as part of the July consent calendar that you will be having in July, so that then our data and stats team could make that change by August 1, and it would be in effect before the new school year.
Okay. Did you want to add anything more to that, Leah?
I just want to add, to reiterate what Angie said. So I presented the issue to all the special ed directors in the state on May 11th. Told them what the current data system, how the current data system functions, and asked them their feeling about the start date at which if you tried to enroll the student, UTREX would give you a red flag for no, you cannot enroll this student, because the student's birth date comes either before, comes after the date. And all of the feedback, every single bit of the feedback that I received. Special ed directors desired the date to be prior to the beginning of the school year so that there isn't this weirdness where a family could believe that they could enroll their student because their student was still 21, but then on September 1, the system would kick them back out because the student was already 21 when September 1 came around. So unanimously they asked that we move the date to before the school year began.
So, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So I'd like to propose a motion to adopt the R277419 Draft 1 of Pupil Accounting on first reading and send it to the board for second and final reading on the July consent calendar.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-419 as amended on first reading and move it to the board on second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item 2.6, R277-400, school facility emergency and safety. Angie just left, so Ben?
So we've done a couple things, as I recall, with this. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. We've done a couple things with this rule. I know that the primary edits to this rule have been done in Section 6, and it was based on some inquiries related to the number of fire drills that schools are required to do each year. So that's where the primary changes have been made. We've also gone through and made some non-substantive changes to kind of update the rule, as it's been a while since it's been redone, but the primary changes will be in Section 6.
Okay.
When you'll notice that what they're doing is there's a goal to have more schools doing the drills for parent and student reunification. And so this adds parent and student reunification drills to the list of drills that LEAs should be alternating amongst the emergency drills they're looking at. And I think Angie initially, and they've also included a proposal that there be a parent-student reunification plan for each LEA. That's on line 151 and 152. And there's also the proposal that each school have at least one drill per school year. And here's Angie who can explain that more. 400?
Okay. And I needed to text Board Member Hanson. She is wanting to participate. Is she back on? Okay. Okay.
Okay. And Board Member Brittany Cummins, did you have?
I do have some questions. I'm just wondering when the best time would do it. If there's more background presentation first, I could wait.
Angie, did you have more background information? I know Brittany had a question.
And I apologize. So I feel badly. I was late to standards, and they pretty much handled the rule without me, and now I'm just back in time to have missed the background. But this rule was requested for update based on some feedback Board Member Hanson received from some of her districts. I think I've heard some questions about the drill requirements, and I don't know, Ben, if what you described was that we found that a lot of the requirements related to especially fire drills and even the board's requirements to require drills in general of LEAs is found in Utah code. And so we are limited in what we can do with respect to changing Section 6, which is the drill requirement rule. But one thing that you'll see in the rule is a requirement for a parent and student reunification drill. Is that about where you guys got to?
Yes.
Okay. And I will get back up on the screen.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins, did you want to ask your question?
I'm on the phone now. Sorry, I didn't know we were discussing this. If you guys have comments or questions for me.
Okay. Thank you, Linda.
Okay. So my question, is about the expectations behind the parent reunification drill. I think it's a fantastic idea. I was thinking about this the other day of just what does that look like, you know, when some emergency happens, like the school my kids go to, the power went out and they were expecting it was going to be out for 2 hours. And it was like, well, how do we, you know, inform parents? What's the process, et cetera? And as I think about this yearly requirement for an LEA, I'm just wondering what the expectations are when you have a school where a majority of the parents are working during the day, because this is a requirement not just on a school, but now it's a requirement on families to participate in something that I think is highly beneficial. But what is the expectation for a number of students who may not have a parent who can participate in the drill at any given time? Their employer says, nope, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you the time off. You know, is there an expectation that parents would have advance notice so that they can work with their employer to do so? Or so I'm just worried, because this basically is an expectation not just on LEAs, but it's an expectation on families. And so if you have an LEA that struggles to get parent participation in these drills, are they held accountable for what may be community struggle?
Okay.
Maybe I can kind of answer that. We went to, those of you who went, and I don't know who went and who didn't, to the emergency management at the Capitol. They were very high on these reunification drills. And it's something that I have been concerned about as I've watched various shootings on TV, the aftermath, kids running everywhere, calling their parents on phones, and parents are telling them to run here, run there. There was an incident a couple of weeks ago in Marsh Valley where, I don't know if you guys know where Marsh Valley is. It's just across the Idaho border, where there was a lockdown. It was just a brother and a sister who got in a fight on the way to school. There was a lockdown because of a rumor. Parents showed up with their semi-automatic rifles because they heard there was a lockdown at the school. Parents do not know what to do, right? You know, my husband and I were sitting at the table the other day talking about my son who's in post-high, and I said, at Granite School District, and I said, well, we were trying to decide whether he would go get him or I would go get him because he's a special needs boy, you know, and my husband said, where will he be? We have no idea. We have no idea where he'll be. So we don't know where to go get him. So I think this is something, like I said, if something occurred, Brittany, they'd have to send somebody, right?
Can I answer?
So that's the question. Who would they send? If they can't go themselves, who are they going to send? Right? Is that person authorized to pick up their child? All of those kinds of things are going to have to be considered. I just think it's a really important thing for parents and families to have that information, to know what's going on, to what's happening. And I know that there's concern that, oh, well, if we tell them where our reunification place is, then maybe they'll target the reunification place. I guess there's always that possibility, but I think it's really remote compared to the benefit this would be to parents and families, to knowing what's going on, to feeling like they have some control and some over what's happening in their schools as far as these serious situations. So.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up or?
Yeah, that's okay, Tara. I know you have a question. So, but my question is the expectation of a drill. If there was an emergency, I would leave my job. I wouldn't care what my employer said. I would be out of there, right? But if there is a drill, I might be more hesitant to leave my employment and risk losing my job in order to participate. And so I guess it's what is the expectation if you require an LEA to hold this drill, that there's room for here's our plan and here's what we would do and here's what could happen, but do we understand that there are some parents who cannot participate in this drill? So
Brittany, all I can say is that some LEAs have them now. I don't participate in them. I wish I did. I wish there were some in my area, but I don't participate in them. But LEAs do that now, and so I know that it's, for example, I know that JUAB does some of them. They had a situation where they had a bus accident, and think about this: the bus accident occurred. The kids got on their phones. The parents got there before the emergency vehicles. Okay, and we're pulling the kids and the neighbor kids, and all the other people off the bus. Okay, because the parents didn't know what to do. You can understand. You're a parent, right? So, but what a dangerous situation is for them to get there and pull injured people off the bus. So those are the kinds of things that I'm concerned about. But I don't have all the answers on the specifics because I don't do them. But I know that there are LEAs that do them now.
Okay, Board Member Warner and then Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Okay, we need to include lockout. There's a difference between lockdown and lockout, and a lockdown is great, but we need to also include a lockout for violence in here as well, or we can say lockdown or lockout for violence because they need to both be included. So with regards to the parent and student reunification, I planned a child abduction response team mock abduction. We advertised it in the media. We had the radio announcing it. The Herald Journal was announcing it. We had law enforcement. We made it really clear to everybody that we were doing a mock abduction. And let me tell you, all hell broke loose because people freaked out when they saw that at the school there was this, it was utter chaos, and we've never been allowed to do another one at a school. The same thing has happened with a SWAT abduction, with a SWAT mock practice as well. It's utter chaos. So I understand in those situations, it's utter chaos. Trust me, in a drill, it's utter chaos. Mm-hmm. So I really like this idea. I'm not sure we really want to make it to be where everybody's doing this because people driving by see these things and they freak out. And I've been on the receiving end of that. And so I'm not so sure we would make parents aware. I know that at least in some of the areas that I represent, a lot of the parents don't know where the kids go, but there is a plan of where kids go. And so it may help to not have just such a really big drill, but I would caution the schools that if they're going to do it, they really want to advertise that this is a drill. Because if you see all these kids leaving a school, I guarantee you people are going to go crazy. So I wouldn't really have a lot of all the parents. And I mean, yeah. It's a great practice in theory, but it would be an absolute nightmare to try to do a drill with all the parents and the students, because anybody that doesn't have a student going to that school and sees this, social media will blow up, and you'll have parents and people and grandparents and everybody else there. So if we're going to implement this, it really needs to be done really well. If you're having a lockdown or a lockout or a shelter in place or a fire drill, that's one thing. Those are expected. But if you're having this, because the kids are going to go off campus, they're going to walk somewhere. They don't stay in a reunification. They don't stay at the school. We don't do reunification at the school. We do it somewhere else. So just be prepared of that unintended consequence, which is a nightmare.
And maybe the logistics wouldn't necessarily be a drill, but right. More making sure that the parents understand what's expected of them. Because I was just thinking, how do you do a drill with a bus crash? You know, I mean, it's like some of these things. Anyway, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Many of us have participated in CERT, right? Community response teams and things like that. I know I have. I know that Jordan School District, they've had drills. I know that they have a text messaging alert system to all the parents that something is going on, and then they direct parents to a certain location to pick up their children. What if communication happened on a biannual basis, twice a year, of to remind parents at the beginning of the fall term, and then maybe again at the beginning of the winter term, just to make sure that parents are up to date on how things will be set up. Another concern that I've had is earthquakes. Are the schools set up with 72-hour kits? You know, if parents or communities can't get to their kids for 72 hours, you know, or, you know, that 24-hour period. I know in my car, I've planned a backpack in case I have to hike from here to Harriman, right? I figure within a day I could get there, right? But, you know, if my child is in another school and I have, you know, other kids in high school, you know, are they prepared? Because I'm not going to be able to get there in time. So are the schools ready for that and prepared for that? Is that included in this?
Michelle? That's my question. May have. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
What if we removed lines 153 and 154 that requires the reunification drill, but still requires the reunification plan, and then districts and individual schools even can decide? Okay, so just another question just popped into my head that LEAs shall, this is saying LEA shall establish a parent and student reunification plan, but it's going to be different for every school within an LEA, and so should an LEA oversee the reunification plan that's established for each school? Because that would be a very independent plan for each school. Oh, it's already in the law. Oh,
yeah, because to have a
But I think, can I make a comment? I'm sorry, it's really hard when you're on the phone, but
yeah,
I'm okay with that as long as parent notification is part of that. We don't want parents showing up with guns at our school because they're going to take out the bad guys. You know what I mean? If they hear that there's a lockdown at the school, parents are not aware of what to do. That's become very obvious. And so I think parents need to have some information on and training on what to do. And right now, can I tell you, as a parent, I've gotten nothing, zero. And I haven't gotten anything for years on what to do if there's an emergency. I can go into the office at the school and have done that and have asked and have been told, but only if I've asked.
I know, I mean, I currently homeschool my children, but when they were in the public school system, I do remember receiving information every year, what to do if there is a lockdown or, and I remember being talked about with the reunification plan. So I believe that is currently being done. Board Member Warner.
What if we were to change on line 154 the word drill to training? And they have,
where they could have like a
training. Well, it would be that all schools shall have at least one parent-student reunification training per school year.
Maybe at the beginning of the year.
However the LEA wants it to look.
Yeah, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I like that idea.
I think if we go that route, you would have to change the word have, because that connotes some type of an organized place and stuff, but that you shall provide parents and students with reunification training each year, and that could be in the form of however the LEA wanted to disperse information, or they could have something. And because even if you provide, you say we're going to have a training night, everyone come to our reunification training, you'll have 2% of your parents show up, and then how effective you feel like I've done my job, I've done my training, but you're still going to have the same chaos happen when you have your emergency. So you just need to, basically the intent is you need to ensure that every parent has access to the information, has been provided the information so that they know in the case of an emergency, what is my responsibility as a parent. And so to me as a parent, that's less of a, I'm going to go to a training and here is some information for you to read and to understand and to digest. And so it's different for everybody. And so, I don't know.
Board Member Warner?
So I'd like to make a motion that we add below lockdown, or we could, to change C, line 119, to say lockdown or lockout for violence. And then on lines 151 through 150, or 153, 151, to read, in cooperation with LEA's local law enforcement agency, and LEA shall establish a parent and student reunification plan beginning with 2019 to 2020 school year. All schools shall annually provide a parent and student reunification training.
Okay, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I approve the motion, I noticed that Terry Shoemaker and Mark Clement had signed up for public comment. Did you still wish to provide it?
Ben
Okay.
Parsley, too. Looks like Ben Parsley.
Oh, Ben Parsley as well.
Horsley.
Horsley. Sorry, Horsley.
I got that.
So I'll hold off on
There you go. You can use that one.
that. Okay. Go ahead.
Is it ready? There we go. Terry Shoemaker with the Utah School Boards Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. Thank you. Is there a more timely subject than this right now? I don't think so. This is just incredibly, unfortunately, important to us right now. So you've been talking about the concern that we've had, and I'm going to let these two talk about it from their own perspectives as far as the reunification. The superintendents that met with me on Wednesday and we talked about this, their concern was the requirement we have to do a reunification drill. Not that we have to do a reunification plan. There's a difference between the two. And frankly, I'm going to say to you, having to evacuate in an emergency a whole school district, every school, I certainly come to understand the importance of a reunification plan. And we had a plan in place and we used it and it worked reasonably well under those circumstances. But every emergency since Columbine has taught us that all reunification plans can change the day the emergency occurs. Mm-hmm. So what we want to be able to help our folks understand is how flexibility is so needed in these kinds of things. But parents need to be reassured too. So they need to understand what the plan is. Like Michelle said just here recently, she heard from Washington County School District probably, what was going to be the reunification plan should there something happen in the school that their children resided at. Absolutely that needs to happen. So the suggested changes I think are fine. They're moving in the direction that we would suggest. We're not sure we need 153 and 154 in those two lines. We're going to have the plan, and we're going to certainly communicate the plan, but to practice the plan sometimes creates other issues, and you've talked about what those issues are. And for families, sometimes because it is a practice, it turns in not to what it is we want it to be. Not that practicing these things aren't important. I'm not saying that. But having the whole community involved in it sometimes turns it into something that isn't quite intended. With that, let me have Ben and Mark comment.
First, I just want to say I'm Ben Horsley, Grandin School District Communications Director. Just want to thank Linda Hansen for bringing this issue to the forefront. And with this rule change, I appreciate the consideration and thoughtful consideration of this issue. It's an important issue. With respect to the fire issue, that's something we're going to be addressing with the legislature as well. In the 10 years I've been with Grandin School District, we've not had a single fire or evacuation drill required for an actual fire. but we hold regularly probably 1 to 2 shelter-in-place protocols or a lockout protocol a week. And so this last week, we initiated a training. We called it a emergency preparedness boot camp, and we spent 48 hours with our administrative teams helping them develop new school emergency response plans and changing the focus from these very static plans to become more dynamic. And what we're really trying to get down to the end of the row to our teachers in the classroom situation is implementing this notion of run, hide, fight instead of just hiding out. And we've seen that the necessity of that type of requirement and philosophy and autonomy and dynamic in some of the more recent emergency situations that we've seen take place. So in any given instance, a school may go on to a lockdown protocol or lockdown with cover, which would be an actual threat within the school itself. If you're on the other end of the building, a secondary teacher may choose to, in that situation, evacuate the building if they feel like they can safely do so. And that's how we're going to be training our folks from here on out. And so when we're talking about implementing into rule more static function, that's a little bit of a concern. We want autonomy, we want dynamics, we want people thinking on their feet and using common sense instead of just saying, this is what I have to do because this is what policy says. And so with respect to the notion of, with all due respect, I appreciate wanting to alleviate the drill requirement, but a training and a drill sound like the same thing to me. They really do. And I think to a lot of administrators that they're going to feel the same way. So we publicize in Granite School District our emergency protocols every fall in our parent magazine that goes home to every household in the mail, via social media, and in a number of other locations and places. I can tell you that nobody pays attention to that information until they need it. It's a grim reality. Whenever we have one of these shelter-in-places, people ask me, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? And we can publicize that information until the sun comes down. It's the same requirement that the legislature has with respect to youth safety seminars. We hold those annually on suicide, bullying, and other things of that notion. And as Brittany so adequately described how those meetings go, we get about 2% attendance. And unfortunately, we had a suicide in one of our school locations. The month before, we had 30 people at the training on youth suicide protection. And after the suicide occurred, we had almost 1,500 people show up to a meeting. And it's just a grim reality of the busy nature of our parents and our families. We can hold these things. We're happy to do so. But I think you and I and every school administrator want the same thing. And that's to provide something that's quite effective in helping alleviate concerns and prepare kids for the emergency situations that we're invariably going to face in any given situation. So I do like the notion of establishing parent and student reunification plans. I know Jordan School District put together last year, the year before, an excellent video that trains people on what those protocols will look like. We're preparing one of our own as well in Granite School District. My last concern with respect to having the actual evacuation, we held 2 actual reunification situations last year in Granite. One was at Monroe Elementary for a gas leak. And those students did a great job. The parents did an excellent job, and it all came down to, I think as Lisa was mentioned, actually Terrell as well, the communication. It's just the communication is incredibly important. And about 3 hours of that training earlier this week was on how do we communicate in these situations. And so when we do a good job of that, things go a lot smoother. And so, again, I think giving us flexibility with respect to having those emergency protocols is incredibly important. Help us to reinforce this dynamic nature of how these drills need to be handled and these situations need to be handled.
I have just a question for him. So you're a PIO, so you probably can answer this better than anybody besides Emily. Okay, if we were to take 153 and 54 out, how do we make sure, how do you think it would be best worded to ensure that parents know about that reunification plan. So Granite, you mentioned sends a booklet home, and parents don't probably look at it too much until it is an emergency. But how would you best as a PIO ensure that the majority of parents, or as many parents as possible, know about that reunification plan?
I think just adding to the second line, as Linda expressed that, I regret that she's not familiar with what those plans are. In terms of just ensuring that those are sent home, just adding that requirement, which should be more than sufficient. And we're doing that right now. Again, you can't force, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it, obviously. That information is there. I think to Linda's concern, and even answering your question that was earlier, these parents who can't participate in a drill, they do have emergency contacts. And we find that a number of our lower socioeconomic parents aren't able to come, even in an emergency situation. They're reliant on those emergency contacts. And even in that situation, our training earlier this week reflected on the fact that we might have kids in our buildings overnight. And and we're responsible for them in that situation. So those plans do include those concepts. But the communication piece, I think, is incredibly important. So just mandating that I think if Linda wants to know where her kids are going to go, I don't want to publicize that to the world and create another target potentially for a shooter. We saw a situation earlier this year where the shooter pulled the fire alarm in hopes of encapsulating more of a mass critical situation. I don't want to. The reality is, if we're talking about active shooters, which I think we are by and large, it's going to be a student, and they're going to know where our emergency protocol is going to lead them. I'm not worried about a parent knowing that information, but I don't want to necessarily advertise a secondary evacuation location to the broader public. If Linda wants to know, or any other parent wants to know, I would encourage them to go talk to their administrator. There is a plan. There's actually even supposed to be now a secondary evacuation location in case your primary one fails. And so that's something we're working on. That communication needs to be fluid, but it does need to have some discretion.
Thank you. That does make sense on what you just said.
Can I ask a question, Michelle?
Hold on one second. Lisa Cummins wanted to ask a question, and then you'll be next.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So
Lisa.
with that secondary location, would it be appropriate to do a push text just to parents on record?
Absolutely, and that would be one of the first things we would do.
Okay. All right. Linda?
So that's my concern. Yes, I'm a very involved parent, and I don't know, and I read everything that comes home, Ben. So I don't know what's going on. So how many parents are going to go in there and find out and be prepared? That's my concern. Nothing's going to happen until something happens at the school and a bunch of parents show up with guns or rifles, or they're telling their kids to run the opposite direction because the kids have them on their cell phones and the parents don't know what the kids are supposed to be doing. That's my concern, is that in general, parents need to know. They need to know what to expect and what to do. Because when the situation happens, their kids are going to tell them before your message gets to them. They're going to hear, their kids are going to pick up their phones and call their parents.
I don't disagree, Linda. And again, I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're getting the information where people are reading it. And if you're not reading our Parent Link magazine, then I need to provide some other tool or avenue. I know that information was emailed home directly as well with our emergency protocols. In a district like ours, I get probably at least 5% of my population who says I didn't get the phone call, and it comes to find out that their information is just not up to date with the school. And that happens. I mean, I deal with that. I probably get 5 or 6 phone calls a week just on that issue alone. I don't know how to overcome that. I can't force parents to, again, make sure that when their phone number changes, they're alerting the school. I can't force people to read my content. I try to make it as attractive as possible. We send way too much information home as it is, so sometimes that information gets diluted, and that's a huge issue. In that training alone this week, I said, stop using your phone systems for anything but emergencies, because then they will take it seriously when they get a phone call. And but you bring up again a very valid point. I post to social media almost instantaneously on these situations, and parents get mad because they're getting that information before they get the phone call, which takes sometimes between 15 to 30 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm still going to post it there because I want to get it out in every tool that I have. And I agree with you, Linda, 100%. It's just an ongoing problem, and I don't think a board rule is going to fix it.
Right. There's some concerns that we just don't know.
Just something I have
Angie, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So Deputy Superintendent Norman, who's sitting behind me, sits on the UETN board. The UETN board. She just wanted me to remind everybody too that there is this issue of the technology and systems being overwhelmed. I guess UEN one time, I think it was with there was a student who was shot. They sent out a text message to their whole university community. There were students who were receiving some of those texts 5, 6, 7 hours later because of the congestion. Mm-hmm. So that's another player who we may want to invite to the table to participate in figuring out that whether we have the infrastructure and what are some of the technological obstacles that you may find with text, with emails, etc. So she just asked me to add that to the conversation.
Yeah. And Mark, did you have anything more to add?
Mark Clement from Alpine School District School Board. Just a couple of items. Most of them have been covered here, but I think that you have to be kind of careful in mandating new onerous requirements on LEAs. And cases when that is appropriate, I think, are when maybe these local school districts are not motivated enough currently. This particular case, the LEAs are totally motivated. Their shareholders, the parents, are going to be, very alert to this kind of a problem, and they are trying to do everything they can and expending maximal effort to make that happen. So I don't think it's a problem with motivation that we need to put in a new mandate. I think for some LEAs, it may make sense to hold drills. But again, this flexibility of them being motivated already and giving them the flexibility to do what works for them is really important. Maybe one thing I could add, and this goes back to, questions of active shooters, knowing where the location is going to be. And I mean, if you hold these drills, you are going to introduce additional risk that was not there if you don't hold the drills. So you need to do a cost-benefit analysis, and I haven't seen that kind of data in creating this rule. For example, we had a parent who, again, is mentally on medication for some mental problems, but occasionally will show up and it will freak out other parents because they know that this person's, had problems before. So you get all kinds of dynamics going in this kind of a drill that I think you need to consider carefully before introducing a mandate.
Thank you. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So if we, in the rule, if we took out line 153 and 154 and then just left in the requirement, which sounds like everyone's doing already anyways, is creating a reunification plan for students and parents, and left that part in there and required some type of a communication, right? That's the obvious part of it, but putting that in there that says that must be communicated to whoever needs to be communicated to. If you have a plan in your reunification plan, do you always articulate the place, or can there be certain parts that are like key codes, like here's our plan, you will be communicated the location by this method, or so I'm just curious what that looks like for you, and then here's your plan and here's the parts that we keep kind of confidential based on safety. So
I, with, again, due respect to Linda's concerns, I think they're very valid. And to your question, I think changing that 153 and 154 to publicizing reunification procedures may be the language that would be appropriate, and indicating that we, again, it's totally, we're totally able to omit specific language that could cause security concerns, but at the same time making sure that everybody's getting that information, and that they know there is a plan in place. I think that's what most parents want. They just want to know that we're thinking about it, and that we do have a procedure and process in place. And so I think that's very appropriate.
Okay. Board Member Warner.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to best work that. Would you be okay, or how do you feel about us doing something like a training of some sort or a notification, making sure parents know, and then having us look at this with the statewide school safety plan that we're looking at? I mean, because we do have if this is the 2019, we have another year or so to work on this.
Well, you go ahead and I'll respond.
Okay, so I think you're opening up another box here on the school safety plan. I mean, there's a lot of issues there that I feel very strongly about and would love to talk about those. But on this particular issue, I think the thing that we're really worried about is having the drill being required. And as kind of as a side note, maybe to address some of this, I mean, it's very interesting to me that you can even have a fire drill and parents can be unaware of that. Currently, there's lots of parents who don't understand fire drills, or they freak out when they hear about their child texts them, "Hey, I'm going outside for a fire drill," and all of a sudden it becomes an active shooter, and they're not even able. I guess what I'm trying to say is, you need to look at what additional improved performance will you accrue as a result of the drill that you don't get from just information, and make sure that that is worth the cost of that drill.
Okay. Yes, Terry.
Thank you. Terry Shoemaker again. So, Terrell, I think on June 20th at the legislature, the Superintendent's Association has been invited to come up and share their 5-point plan that we've given to the governor's office relative to things that we need to have take place. Obviously, one of those is training. Okay, training is critically important, and so I don't want to discount that as part of what you're suggesting here. As we were looking at this particular rule, the part that we are trying to emphasize here and there and everywhere we talk about it is that the school boards need flexibility here. When we're mandated, we have to do so many fire drills and they have to be done this way, and you got to do this and this and this. And what that does, it limits our effectiveness, and then we become totally predictable. What we're learning is, in these new wave of violent acts, is we've got to be well trained and react at the moment. So training around that is what we're trying to do. That's what Ben was talking about here all throughout the state. We're asking for flexibility by not imposing too many things from on top as we work through these things, because every school, the little tiny schools out in Box Elder County that you're very well aware of, Terrell, are way different than Ben's big high schools. Right. And a high school, by the way, reunification plan is just
a nightmare.
Well, let's just call it what it is. The kids are done with school that day.
Yeah.
Okay?
So if we were to take 153 and 154 out and leave that, and that would give the flexibility that you think they need. Okay. But keep in the lockout and lockdown, because there is a difference, and we should have, schools should be able to choose if they want to have a lockout or a lockdown drill. Okay. So maybe I'll just.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So did Terrell make a motion?
Not yet.
No, I did, didn't I? I jumped in and made the motion before they.
So you made the motion to just amend.
But I think you pulled it out, though, didn't you? Or
yeah, because they haven't spoken.
So you're.
She withdrew the motion.
She withdrew the motion.
Yeah.
Okay. So I move that we strike 153 and 154 as they are currently stated, and then and you guys can help me with whatever you think this, but in line 151 and 152 currently reads, in cooperation with the LEA's local enforcement agency, and LEA shall establish a parent and student reunification plan for each school.
So you want to add for each school at the end of plan?
So, yeah. And publish their reunification procedures. Huh?
The parents' reunification procedures or the administrators? Parent-student reunification.
Well, yeah, their parent and student reunification procedures.
Yeah, procedures.
Is that the right word?
Yes.
I guess what I'm wondering is if you only want to publish the parent part of that, as opposed to what the administrators and what their protocols are inside the school.
So it's basically publishing what the parent needs to know as their part in that reunification portion.
I think to Linda's concern, even mandating that they be posted on the website, school's website, and then sent home annually would be, I think we're all okay with that.
Yeah, I don't even publish.
So
and
publish.
So the LEA can decide in multiple ways, however they think, but whatever the right wording is so that parents
Can I
have
make a
access to
comment here? I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, hold on.
So my comment.
Linda, hold
publish.
Linda, we just need to make sure that Brittany's done with her motion. Are you done with your motion?
Okay, sorry.
I was going to make a comment on the motion, kind of like what Ben said. If you publish it, they can just put it on the website and nobody would ever see it. I would rather see it sent home so that at least it's sent and the parents all have the opportunity to see it. Because a website, lots of people never go to a website. I think parents at least need to have it in their possession. That's just my opinion.
Okay, and then what was the rest of your?
So, and I would just clarify that the word publish to me doesn't mean just on the website.
Right.
It's you're putting it out for consumption, and you need to, and I think LEAs can understand the best way to communicate to their community. And so that's why I was thinking the word publish, because then they can use their website. Yeah, but multiple ways, newsletters. They could have it in their registration packets. They can have it in, 100 different opportunities. And so if we're too explicit, then it would lead to certain behaviors. And so I guess my question is just publish. And I just want to be careful that we're not requiring them to publish too much. So what is it that we're requiring them to publish, which would be their parent reunification procedures? Is that the right wording?
Right, because we wouldn't want them to publish
locations and all that kind of stuff.
So I think, though, I don't know, if we left it like that, I mean, I'm assuming the LEAs and the schools would know not to publish locations.
Okay.
So we don't have to, state that, do we?
And then also in my motion would be adding to line 119. Is that the right one? Yes. Nope.
Lockdown or lockout.
Sorry, 119 to add or lockout after lockdown.
Okay, so the motion before us is to strike out lines 153 and 154, and then on line 152 to add for each school and publish the parents' reunification plan. Did I say that right? Procedures.
I don't know. Does that sound good? What I've got there?
Plan. Okay. And then on 119 to add or lock out. It's.
Yeah, got the 119 on that one's easy. Does that look good? What I've got? Okay.
Okay. So any discussion to that motion? Okay, oh, yes.
And I would make note that this wouldn't limit an LEA, that obviously if they want to do a reunification drill, that they are more than welcome and to participate in that. So.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passed unanimously. Okay, item 2.7, R277-602, the Carson Smith Scholarship, funding and procedures. And this is an amendment. Angie and Leah.
All right, thank you. As Leah's coming up to the table, just wanted to give you the background that this last session, SB 153, Carson Smith Scholarship Amendments passed. A number of the changes in that bill were actually recommendations from our staff on how to improve some of the auditing requirements and parental notification requirements for those private schools who receive Carson Smith scholarship payments. This rule has been updated to reflect the changes that were in SB 153, including adding some language in the rule that we were directed to do through administrative rule in the rule. And I can just summarize quickly. It includes, for example, on lines, and there is a draft too that you may, we've had to finalize this morning because some of the language about the agreed upon procedures, which we're required to do in the rule in lieu of an audit, we were finalizing. So essentially what the statute allows is for a private school who receives scholarship payments to either do a formal audit or an annual audit, or to conduct an agreed upon procedure established by the board. So the rule allows for that, and that annually you'll see on lines, it's all in blue and red, you'll see that that agreed upon procedures, the superintendent shall annually, 210, yes, lines 210 through 217. The superintendent shall annually publish the agreed upon procedures document for a new school that's applying to become eligible, as well as annually for those who are those schools who are continuing to annually provide. And then they have to submit that agreed upon procedure by May 1st of each year. So that's one of the big changes. The other big change that I think private schools as well as our office are very excited about is in statute, it used to state that we had to send quarterly checks to private schools, and then the parents had to come into the school to sign those checks. Now the statute was amended to allow us to do electronic payments. So that language is on 81 through 83. And I was just going to try and quickly summarize. Oh, another one of the big changes, and this is online. I apologize. It's about the reimbursements, and oh, here it is, and prorating. It's on lines 218. No. Essentially, if a student leaves a private school mid-year, now we have procedures where the private school's payment will either be changed if they haven't received the payment yet for that quarter, or where the superintendent may require reimbursement for the days of that quarter that the student is not receiving services. And then that money can then be applied to another student. And then the other change the big change that took place and is actually in statute states that if a student becomes ineligible, say in the middle of the first or the second year of the 3-year scholarship, that they then can continue to receive services from the private school till the end of the school year, but they can't then receive an additional year after that once they've now often, I think Assistant Superintendent Voorhees explained to me maybe a speech disability or hearing might be corrected, a speech disability, and so then they no longer qualify for IDEA services. So then the student could finish out the school year, but then would be ineligible for the second or third year of the scholarship. So that's a summary as quickly as I could get with this rule. Something that was actually requested today that I didn't state, I don't believe, in the board backup is potentially the need for this also to be read on second and final reading as part of the board's July consent calendar, if you're comfortable with it, enough for us to put on the consent calendar so we could have it take effect ASAP for this next school year. And that was the additional request. And so I think we're available for any questions.
Okay. Did you have anything more to add, Leah?
Yes. Can I add one thing?
Yes.
Okay. Assistant Superintendent, Student Support, Leah Voorhees. Okay. If you'll turn to line 206. So the lines 206 through 209 were actually supposed to be deleted.
And they are actually now.
They are
fixed that.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the Assistant Superintendent Grange has actually recommended, so if you look at line 217, we have requested that in order to become an eligible private school, if you're applying to be a new private school to accept the Carson Smith Scholarship, your application has to be in by May 1st, because we are required to publish a list of eligible private schools on June 1st. So that requirement we added on line 217 for the private school having to submit their agreed upon procedures about their financial statement and their ability to stay open for a year. That's really what we're looking for. However, Assistant Superintendent Grange recommended that for private schools who are continuing, we all have already made them eligible, but they have to submit a financial statement annually so that we know that they're using the Carson Smith Scholarship appropriately, that we should actually move up that submission date to November so that if something's going wrong, we can fix it before the end of the school year. Okay. So I don't know, Chair Bolter, if you'd like Superintendent Grange to speak to that quickly.
Yes.
If it's okay. I kind of drafted a little bit of language. I don't know if this will help Deputy Stallings. So some of the suggested changes, I think in line 214. So on 214, I think it would be beneficial if we added by November 30th of each year. Those are the days that all of our LEA financial statements are due. I think it would be good if we had a consistent practice across our programs.
November 11th?
November 30th.
Oh, November.
So since this is an annual submission, it would be due on November 30th. My other suggestion is that in line 217, that instead of saying May 1st, we say May 1st of the fiscal year before their initial year of eligibility. Because you want that in the year before you're trying to make them eligible. Does that make sense?
And I was going to say the May 1 prior to.
Yeah.
Can you say what you just said, though?
Before their fiscal
I'm sure there's a better way to say it, but I think the message we want to communicate is it's before the year we start paying them. So I said May 1st of the fiscal year prior to their initial year of eligibility. And that might be a little wordy, but.
So
prior to being deemed eligible?
Becoming eligible to accept the Carson Smith Scholarship. How about that? That's the language we use in the rest of the rule. So the idea here is twofold. The first time you're applying to be an eligible school, you have to demonstrate that you have the financial resources to stay open. For the rest of the time that you're an eligible school, that you demonstrate that you are appropriately applying the Carson Smith Scholarship. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes.
I have two itty-bitty tiny technical things too, especially if you're going to do it on second. On line 120, the new edition indicates that students may participate in the Carson Smith program and also be part of statewide online education program. It just says may participated, and I think we just wanted to say may participate.
Yeah, I had.
And then in 199, this indicates that this section indicates that eligible schools can either do financial statements or agreed upon procedures. I think that in 199 it says described in subsection 4. I think it needs to say in subsection 3 and 4 because that puts those two deadlines and dates. So however you want to work that.
I think that now if we're moving the dates into 3, we probably could just get rid of subsection 4.
Yeah.
So we'll just change it to 3.
Okay. I think that's
subsection 4 was essentially my way of now saying the LEA shall, because it's a little awkward because we're saying the superintendent shall publish and then we're putting the dates by which they have to. Ideally, we might want to change 4 to include the March 1st and the November 30th date because really 4 is the LEA, the private school shall. Do you see the kind of why I took it out of 3 because it's then kind of implying an LEA function in what is the superintendent's. So I could fix it if you would be comfortable with me actually putting the deadlines in 4 so that it's saying the private school shall end deadline versus the superintendent publishes the deadline. It doesn't then actually force the LEA unless you say the LEA shall. I don't know. Or the private school shall.
Yes.
One of the other options that you have if you wanted to choose to go this way, what we do with all of our other agreed upon procedures is that the deadlines and due dates and how those are to be reported are actually established in that document. So you also have that ability. With this one, I think where you may have entities who are not potentially going to be using the agreed upon procedures, I think you really want to link that concept of whichever choice the LEA makes in their first year of application. If they're going to give you financial statements or they're going to give you the agreed upon procedure, it has to be here May before you want to make them eligible.
By May 1st.
And I don't think that May date kind of popped out to me. That just came to me. I don't think that popped out to me as I read this, is we really want that May date hooked to their initial eligibility. And then whatever choice the LEA or the private school makes, whatever choice the private school makes to continue their eligibility, that could be the November 30th date. And that would either be their financial statements or their agreed upon procedures. The other potential thing that I would put in the agreed upon procedures is it's possible, especially with a private school, that they may not have a fiscal year end like a government. So they may be January to December, in which that November date won't work for them. And so we're going to have to think about that one, especially if they have a different due date than a government does. I'm unsure right now if they do, because that's not something we currently ask them to do. So we may have to make a modification at a later date to this rule to take into consideration some of those special circumstances if they pop up.
Okay. Any other discussion? Brittany Cummins?
I was just going to make a motion if that's okay.
Okay. Yep.
I move that we approve R277602, draft 1, with the suggested amendments for dates as they are placed in their appropriate places regarding a May 1st and a November 30th deadlines for reference, and we approve it on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-602 as amended with the May 1st and November 30th dates on first reading and move it to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
And yes.
Just to clarify, that will then be coming back in August for second and final reading, right? Because that, or did you want, are you comfortable with the consent calendar?
I'm comfortable with it being on the consent calendar.
Oh, I'm comfortable with it. Do we need to make a motion to put it on the consent calendar?
Probably, just to clarify that in that motion, it's to come for second and final reading during the July consent calendar.
That is, well, I guess we've already voted, so I move that this be placed on the consent calendar in July.
Okay, so R277-602 will be placed on the consent calendar in July. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Okay, we're done. We don't need a motion to adjourn.